Okay. Ah, there we go. All right. So, Zelensky accused Russia of using phosphorus bombs. What does that mean? We go over this article real quick. Let me can read all that. That's good. So I'll read this article and then we can discuss it. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Thursday accused Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces of using phosphorus bombs in their latest wave of attacks on his country, telling NATO leaders in Brussels that people were killed, including children. And Europe is going through a war, every day of which a full is full of war, crimes of Russian troops, Zelensky said, according to an NBC News translation. This morning, I received information that Russian troops had used phosphorus bombs against civilians in Ukraine. He did not provide evidence in his address. The Pentagon said it was not able to confirm the Ukrainian leader's allegations when contacted by an NBC. It's difficult to verify the claims without U.S. personnel on the ground, three U.S. defense officials. But if true, the use of white phosphorus bombs would add a disturbing new dimension to Russia's military assault on Ukraine. Here's a general overview of their destructive potential. I'll tell you this. I don't think I can show you photos on Twitch. But white phosphorus. I will go over it deeper here, but white phosphorus is literally not a joke. The white form of the chemical substance phosphorus is highly toxic and notorious for the severity of the injury that causes, according to information compiled by the Human Rights Watch, leading watchdog organization. White phosphorus ignites on contact with oxygen. It's highly soluble in fat, meaning it grievously burns humans. If it lands on somebody, it burns very, very vigorously. Amish, de Breton Gordon, a former commander of the United Kingdom's and NATO's chemical, biological, and nuclear defense forces. Munitions, artillery shells, bombs, and rockets containing white phosphorus operate similarly to incendiary weapons, as defined by the Protocol 3 to 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. They set fires and cause burns, though the reactions of flame, heat, or combination thereof produced by a chemical reaction of a substance delivered on the target. And this is an example of the U.S. using. U.S. Fires white phosphorus smoke screens as part of the early morning patrol on November 6, 2004, on the outskirts of Fallujah, Iraq. What does the law say? The use of white phosphorus is not outright banned under international weapons law. It is not illegal for militaries to possess it, and armed forces around the world, including U.S. troops, have said they use it to mark a target or create smoke, according to David E. Johnson, a military expert for the RAND Corporation. But like all weapons, it is illegal to use against civilian targets, and the use of airdrop incendiary weapons in popular areas is prohibited under Protocol 3, Johnson said. Going after civilian targets indiscriminately, the biggest war crime. There is no matter what the weapon, he said. Yeah, no matter what the weapon, but some weapons are more horrifying. Some weapons are more horrifying than others. White phosphorus is nasty. It's after I finish this article, I'll go in a bit more detail about that stuff, but it's rough. Where has been used? Human Rights Watch says munitions containing white phosphorus has been deployed repeatedly over the last 15 years, including by the U.S. and U.K. forces in Iraq, American-led coalition forces against Islamic State terrorist groups, militants in Iraq and Syria in 2017, and by Israel and Gaza in 2008, 2009. What they don't say about that is that they used it against the civilian population. They don't really focus on that, but Israel used it against the civilian population. um, and that's how I learned about it. Syrian forces with Putin's support have used white phosphorus to set fire to towns and villages, Breton Gordon said, describing witness images from northeast Syria last year of children being terribly badly burned. White phosphorus munitions have also been used by Saudi Arabian led coalition forces in Yemen in 2016, by NATO allied security forces and the Taliban in Afghanistan between 2005 and 2011, and by Ethiopian forces in Somalia in 2007. Um, yeah. Uh, so if you don't know, white phosphorus, when it gets on skin, yeah, it burns, and it just like it keeps burning through you, right? Like it gets on your skin, and it just like drills down. In the aftermath of white phosphorus on a person, you can find it if you want. If you look online, you can find the pictures. They're not great, not great, but you can see it inside a person's like flesh. It just like burns it away in a different way than like a fire does. Not the same, like a chemical burn that just like just just dissolves you. Not dissolves, probably not the right word, but like still, it just like goes into your body. And you'll say like, okay, so white phosphorus is raining down above us. Right? I see people who are who have it on their skin. I want to help. I want to help. So what I'll do, I'll toss water on it. It's a powder. Let me toss water to get rid of it. Nope, don't do that. That makes it worse. That makes it worse. Don't do that. You are not helping if you put water on white phosphorus. So it's a very difficult thing to deal with, right? Like it doesn't. White phosphorus is dangerous, dangerous stuff. It ignites in the air, and it's perfect for torturing a wide swath of people. Right? The only like just don't get it on you. That's the answer. Don't get that shit on you. There's other ways to like neutralize it. I forget what it is. I have to look at look into that. I forget exactly how you neutralize it, but it's not with water. Not with water. So yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, the only facts got it right. Or just take a breath because it in the moist parts of your body, right? It's even warm. So like, don't breathe it in through your mouth, certainly, right? It's burning all the way down. If it comes in through your nose, and it gets to your lungs, it's burning through your lungs. It's bad. It's horrifying. And the U.S. still uses it. U.S. uses it, right? And the U.S. and U.S. Allies, like Israel, use it. Um, you think a copper sulfate for neutralizing it, kamikaze? It might be. I forget what it was. Yeah. The U.S. and its allies use this horrifying thing. We can't. So in this moment, when Russia is dropping it, if that's the case, because we don't, it's not confirmed. It's not confirmed. Fog of war. Zelensky could be telling the truth. He could be telling a lie, but we're using it, Russia might be using it, and Russia has used it before, right? So it's not like this is something out of character for them. They used it before, as the article did. How can we actually get these things under control if the U.S. takes part in these things? And it's not just white phosphorus. It's cluster bombs. They there's a lot of countries that ban cluster bombs. I think there's a treaty against specifically cluster bombs. And the U.S. has not signed it. If I'm remembering this correctly, if I'm wrong, then someone correct me in the chat. But as I understand it, that the world wants to ban cluster bombs. Treaty against it. The U.S. has not signed it, and I'm not sure if Russia has signed it, but they've been using it. Cluster bombs are dangerous because they scatter over an area. It's not like you're attacking a single target, especially within a context of a billion areas, right? They go all over the place, and a lot of like quote unquote unintended targets can get hit. They're quite dangerous. And then like there's some bombs that don't go off too, right? So it makes it harder to clean up. There's that video I'm not sure if you guys saw it. That purports to be from Ukraine. I say purports because, who knows these. But there's that video of Ukrainian forces mantling unexploded bomb. I'm not sure if the one I'm thinking of, like cluster bomb. I don't think so. But like, it's a problem when there's unexploded munitions, right? Just because it didn't explode on impact doesn't mean it won't explode later. This is like the same thing with landmines, because if you plant landmines all over the place, right? Within a conflict, if you plant landmines all over the place, and they will some will detonate, taking the enemy forces out. Others won't. Conflict ends. Landmines are still there. Landmines take the legs off of people all the time. Unexploded landmines, all the time. Trojan 2. Trojan 2. Lots of landmines still out there in the world. Don't know where they are. Don't step on this. I forget if the U.S. has banned has banned landmines. Let's find out real quick. I actually don't know. President Biden, time to act and ban landmine. Okay. Let's take a quick look at this. President Biden. Can you say I see this? Okay, good. President, the U.S. campaign to ban landmines. This cluster munition coalition called on President Joe Biden today to set. Oh, this is asking President Biden to act now on ban landmines. Okay. So this is from earlier this year, January 31st. U.S. Cluster Munition Coalition called on President Joe Biden today to set the U.S. on the right side of history by banning landmines, an inhumane weapon that threatens civilian lives. The U.S. CBL and 37 partners, including Arms Control, human rights, religious, and veteran groups, sent a letter to President Biden this morning urging the U.S. to ban landmines and pave a path toward joining the mine ban treaty. So, answer is no. January 31st marks the second anniversary of the current U.S. landmine policy enacted by the Trump administration in 2020, which erased restrictions on the use of these indiscriminate weapons. Trump policy rejected an Obama-era policy that allowed an exception for armed forces to use anti-personnel landmines only in the Korean Peninsula. Okay. On the campaign trail, President Biden promised to roll back the Trump policy, which he deemed reckless. Still, more than a year into the presidency, the Trump policy remains in place. Okay. So the U.S. has not banned it. Trump has exacerbated it. Apparently, there was an exception just for the Korean Peninsula. The fuck? Why? I don't know. But, yeah, landmines cause more harm than good. Absolutely. OnlyFacts says Russian landmines are killing Afghan children for decades after the left. Shout out to you, OnlyFacts. Yeah, decades, decades. But we don't completely ban these things. How? Looks like Biden is at least more amenable to this, right? But hopefully, a total ban. I'm actually curious about this exception. I wish we had someone around who had a better insight into this as to why you would have an exception for the Korean Peninsula. I don't know. I have no clue. Because they want to slow any evasion. Maybe okay. So kinetic pause. First of all, before I can continue on, let's make this an open panel. So exclamation open in chat. I'll continue talking for a bit, but exclamation open in chat. If you guys want to line up for and be a part of the open panel, exclamation open in chat lets you know that you can participate as an audience member, join the Discord server, and go into the robot waiting rooms. So you will let in. Link for your convenience. Yeah, jump on in. We'd love to have you. But kinetic pause. I think I understand what you're trying to say. You're saying that they want to slow down an invasion, so maybe within the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. I've been to the DMZ. Well, just outside the DMZ. um, when I went to South Korea, I visited South Korea a few years ago. Uh, yeah, so there's like that the miles long area between North Korea and South Korea. So I imagine uh, the idea is, well, that's not a civilian area. There is a town there. There's a town in the middle. There's a town in the middle of the DMZ with South and North Korean people. It's like a experiment for peace or something. I don't know. But there's a town. But other than that, it's not a civilian zone. There's no one there, the militarized zone. So I guess that's why they're making that exception. That's a good. That's probably the reason. Thank you for that kinetic pause. I hadn't thought of that at all. Um, Landmines equal the original Squid Game. No Cal Mike. Yeah, you only just listen Dixie. Um, okay. Is it the DMZ between North and South? Yeah, yeah. Because the war is still active. Yeah, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, look, I'm just imagining in a world where there was peace between North and South Korea, right? That you could start dismantling the DMZ. Would they be able to find all the landmines? I mean, again, I get why it's there. If it's because of the DMZ, then I get why it's there. But would they be able to dismantle all of it? I don't know. But because that's my concern. The concern is exactly what oh, how did I do that? Okay, there we go. All right. All right. So back to it. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know what happened. Uh doing that to the Korean peninsula and that area, right? Like, would they find? I feel like at some point in time, innocent people will get hurt by them. But I get why. I get why the situations. Any which way, yeah. Come on in if you guys want to have the discussion. I am in. It's me. There. Right? You guys want to talk about this? Well, Ballo, Ballo. I'll just say. I'll just call you Ballo. I just call it Ballo. But yeah. Um. So yeah, can the U.S. actually be an effective advocate for like against these crimes if the U.S. uses it themselves, right? Like we use depleted uranium. That's another thing the U.S. uses. The U.S. uses depleted uranium. Where does it use it? Where it uses it, and it used it in Iraq and Fallujah again. Like we saw that picture of Fallujah being hit with white phosphorus for a smoke screen. I don't know if that makes any difference when it lands the white phosphorus on people, but one or the other, they use depleted uranium shells, And as you can imagine, that is radioactive. They filled Fallujah up with literally tons of the stuff. They shot like from weapons and I think artillery. They like use a lot of depleted uranium shells, and it's still there. It's still there in Fallujah. People live in Fallujah, and for some reason, must be a coincidence, the rate of birth defects is It's unbelievably high in Fallujah compared to like the rest of Iraq, right? So the surrounding areas of Iraq, the birth defects there, they're still being radiated today. Fallujah was it 2004? The invasion of Fallujah, the Fallujah offensive. It's it's still today, um, but uh, still being used, right? Then how can we be an advocate to stop these things? Um, yeah, Deanna Step, I hear you. Yeah, the U.S. banned from using chemical weapons, depending on the chemical weapon, in warfare, but they still allow police departments to use tear gas towards civilians. Yeah, like, and now we use tear gas, right? That's not. It's a chemical weapon. It's a chemical weapon, but we allow that to be used against citizens. Why? That's not the only way you can disperse a crowd is through tear gas, right? That's We can use other ways to do such a thing, right? Like there's plenty of ways to do that, right? Um, uh, but we still allow that. How? Every country has their war crimes. I agree. I agree. So, we got one person who wants to join us up. Um, Hello, Neon. Hi, how are you?
Hey, buddy.
Hey. So yeah, we're talking about war crime, or well, not necessarily war crimes, but the use of chemical weapons, and the use of weapons that should be banned altogether. What are your thoughts?
They do go hand in hand. I guess my thoughts on like chemical weapons or depleted uranium or just, I mean, banned weaponry in general. What do you mean?
Just all of it. And
Um, well, you mentioned advocacy for whether or not like the United States is, I guess, I don't know. I don't know how you meant it, so feel free to clarify, like whether or not like the United States is valid in trying to, advocate for the dispersal of these weapons, landmines, depleted uranium. Oh, you were talking about white phosphorus earlier as well, and I have a little bit of experience in this. I was in the military, right? And there's it's all part of like the economic complex of it, right? And I think the only way that you can begin to even approach dismantling it is by legislation that'll have to come from within, right? I don't think you're going to see like, something like France or Germany try to legislate the United States stop its production of landmines. I I I would have to look. It's a dated uh, document from the UN, or an article, sorry, but it was something like almost every other country in the UN has voted to, stop using landmines, and yet the United States, and I forget, I think it was Russia or maybe China that voted to keep them, right? So it's all based on the economy, really.
based on the economy, can you go into more detail on that?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're currently aware of this, but the United States is the largest producer of landmines in the world, right? Like we may not use them, but we ship them to countries, all across the world, right? Which is, obviously like a huge conflict of interest because, landmines are not cheap, but they are relatively cheap, right? And then, we end up finding ourselves situations like 20, 30 years later, and the landmines are still there, right? And that's where the humanitarian crisis comes in. You spoke about Fallujah and how people are still almost 20 years later, um, they're still feeling the effects of the depleted uranium, And it's just I really believe that if there's ever going to be a change when it comes to uh, the legality of things like this, it's going to have to come from the countries and it's going to have to come from within the countries, right? From advocacy, legislation. But I always think, there's going to be not to expand the conversation too much, right? But you kind of have to consider whether or not everybody who is in possession of these weapons are rational actors, right? Anybody who gets their hands on like white phosphorus or, chlorine gas or any nerve agent, uh, things like that, right? Um, Assad comes to mind. Uh, Whether or not you can even get these people to agree to legislate or put themselves in a position where they wouldn't use those weapons in the first place. So that's where I think it becomes very complicated and less developed, less democratic countries.
Hmm.
Because we still worry, the South Koreans still worry about, like nuclear dirty bombs coming from north of the DMZ. I know you were talking about that earlier, right? That's like a constant fear that they have to go through. People don't really talk about it. They kind of put it in the back of their minds, right? But there is that worry because North Korea is so volatile. I mean, not as much lately, but that is always the worry.
Um. Someone in chat bought his Twitch hate me terrible name. Anyway, they say the
Huh.
largest stockpilers among these nations collected, I guess, of landmines are 45 million mines from Russia, Pakistan, and India, and China. But like, I'm not sure if your claims contract with the information that he's giving, talking about like who has the largest stockpiles um of landmines, because if we might, you said specifically that we're the biggest manufacturer, not the biggest stockpiler.
That's correct. Yes. No, it's the link that you had earlier is accurate, where the United States doesn't really employ the use of them for when they're deployed militarily, but we do produce them. I can find a source on that if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, that'll be helpful for everyone else. Uh, so a Valo says here, landmines are usually used by small countries slash inferior forces is an effective tool in those situations. If the U.S. wants to do something humanitarian, it makes a lot more sense. They want with something that they didn't directly benefit from. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused with the last bit of that. But are you saying that? I don't know. Um, Dan, if you want to come in and have a conversation, it's fine. But so yes, when there's a so I guess it's the same thing always when it comes to um uh like the military industrial complex, that if there is a economic benefit to these, right, all of a sudden it's hard for politicians, it's hard for nations to quit, right? To ban these weapons. They have a reason that they must use these things. When the military has so many different ways to kill a population, to hurt a population, to control a population, there's so many tools at its disposal. It doesn't need cluster bombs, right? The U.S. doesn't need cluster bombs. The U.S. does have cluster bombs. Like, like why? The rest of the world seems to understand. I can actually look into that too. Um, but don't. Yeah, those pictures are sad. Exactly. Don't. I was saying that before. Don't look into pictures of white phosphorus unless you're actually what's that? Let me look at cluster bombs here. Uh,
I think the question becomes, after a point, the question of deterrent, right? And I think that ultimately has a huge part to play in it, right? With all types of warfare. It's when you really get down to like brass tacks and things like that, it's a matter of what do we have, the United States, that will scare the shit out of everyone who would bother to threaten any of us, right? And so the unfortunate reality, I think, is that the morality of that is gone. I think you could also argue that maybe that some aspect of deterrence is moral, right? Because if the United States, for example, would disarm ourselves from like our vacuum bombs, like white phosphorus and things like that, right? The question becomes, well, how many more, like servicemen or just any other innocent civilian or a other warfighting personnel, like how many more of those people would die? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's I mean I hear what you're trying to say, right? But it's such a fucking cop out, right? Like, can we acknowledge all
Mm-hmm.
that that's a cop out?
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
ultimately I do agree, right? But I can because there's no there's no what's the word? Like this isn't uh it's slipping my mind. But this isn't something, that you can like base off of data, right? Like you can't prove a negative. It's like, oh, well, if we didn't have vacuum bombs, then how many less people would have died, right? Like nobody could know that. It's a and in that way I truly do believe it is a very complicated subject.
Yeah, I I'm sorry. Like I but like this is reminds me of like police forces and
Mm-hmm.
their arguments as to why they desperately need military grade weapons, right? Or military grade uh, equipment. Is that, oh well, officers' lives are on the line, right? Every day. Who knows what could happen, right? Like, would you want to be the one who denies officers this, and then when some huge threat shows up, then they'll be unprotected, right? They'll be outgunned by the criminals. That's something they use, right? That the criminals
Yeah.
are gonna outgun the officers, so they desperately need these weapons. And why do you love criminals so much
Right.
that you give them the advantage? But here's the truth: is that they use these things all the goddamn time. Like once you give them these weapons, then they want an excuse to use the weapons, right? Boys with their
Yeah.
fucking toys. So they'll be rolling out and these MRAPs and shit, right? They'll use the weaponry and that equipment on just like ordinary arrests, right? Like just like talking to civilians. Like they'll use it at any chance they get at any point in time that they can. Um, and so I don't believe it. It's not like police work was impossible beforehand, right? It's not like the U.S. has a uh, a um, a spate of like criminals who uh, have such an advantage in munitions that they would wipe out like a police force, right? We're not that. Like that's the thing in Mexico. Right? That's like a fucking thing in Mexico. That like the drug cartels can literally beat the local governments. They can beat like the army, right? That's the thing that can happen.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not the case here, right? But they like to pretend it's going to happen, that we will fall into chaos if they don't get their weapons, right? It's not as if the U.S. doesn't have other fucking bombs. Not like we don't have a whole list of fucking bombs. So to say, and I know you're not saying this, is just an argument. So
Right.
to say that the U.S. It needs those vacuum bombs. It needs I forget the name of the vacuum bombs. But it needs to produce cluster bombs, right? For the sake of the troops, right? Like that is such a cynical. It's such a disgusting lie, as if they fucking care. It's to line someone's pockets, as you pointed out, Neon. It's to line someone's pockets somewhere, right? Someone's getting rich off of that. But yeah, protecting the troops. Oh my god, I fucking hate it. I fucking hate it. Uh,
No, I completely agree. It's a especially you mentioned the police. It becomes. I mean, I don't think. I mean, there's no better way to say it, right? Where when they have, like fucking grenade launchers and their like M4s and like all their anti-personnel rifles and things like that, right? Like they can't let them just sit in the armory, right? Like it becomes then if they don't use them, it becomes a question of funding, right? And nobody wants to lose their funding, and so it is very cynical. I agree. It's a it becomes I think we completely agree on the police thing, right? Because it's not a question of like, oh, can criminals walk out with like RPGs and grenade launchers, right? Like I don't want to say all the time, but like 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. But I think the interesting conversation, and the conversation where I think we might truly disagree, is the matter of deterrence. And so I'll ask you: do you think that the United States should lead the world in disarming its nuclear arsenal before everyone else, without the implication that Russia, China, or North Korea, anybody, would join us in it?
Okay, I'll answer that question in a second. Guys, you
Sure,
can
yeah.
also join us. Exclamation point open in chat. Lets you know how to join in. So if you guys want to join, this is not just a private conversations. If you guys want to talk about this, we'd love to have you. So jump on in and we'll have that conversation. If you have insight into this, right, then we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you. So be a part of this. Be a part of the Discord, and you can come in and have a conversation. So I'm gonna sneeze. Fuck. Should the U.S. dismantle its nuclear? Okay. There is a long road between the U.S. Like having nukes, mantling nukes, and then having no nukes, right?
Right.
If we were going to lead the world, if we thought like that there should be a zero nuclear policy, then we could actually, yeah, we could do that. We could dismantle bombs. We could say like, well, we're gonna be an example for the world, and we have a huge stockpile. We have a massive stockpile
We
of
sure
nuclear
do.
weapons, right? We won't get through that anytime soon. We don't even have to do it quickly, right? We could just show the world that we are making progress on this, right? I think we still, I think we, I mean, we have the largest stockpile, but I forget how much bigger it is in Russia. Russia has like number 2, right? I forget how
I
much
believe that's correct, yeah.
bigger our stockpile is compared to their stockpile. I guess I can look that up as well. But like it's not as if we will lose that race. Like we'll lose our place as number 1 anytime soon. Nuclear stock. Let me just look that up right
Right.
now.
So just to clarify, you would think that this is like a good thing. This is something that like we should seek to achieve.
1 second.
Yeah, of course.
The Soviet Union, Russia's first nuclear weapons. Soviet Union retained 45,000 nuclear warheads. 1990s, the country stockpile deployed 1,600 and is to be limited. Trying to get United States 6,185 nuclear bombers. Okay, so it's saying that Russia might actually have a little bit more of them. But I'm not positive on that. I have to see another one. Nuclear weapons by country. We'll try this. World population. United States total 5,550 weapons. Retired 1,800. Okay, and Russia 6,200. Okay, so Russia might have an active. Russia might actually have a bigger stockpile than us. So yeah, right. It looks like from the source too. Russia does have a bigger stockpile, so that's something. fine. But in any case, right?
Right.
Um, I think my point still stands. So even though we're number two, and China's the next available with 350 active weapons, if we started dismantling that, it's not a oh hey Olympics, thanks for being here. It's not as if
Hey.
that we will be weaponless anytime soon, right? It's not as if we'd be defenseless if another nuclear armed country started. If we reduce that to 2,000 bombs, then we can still wipe out humanity if we felt like it. You know, if it was a Thursday and things weren't going our way, I rolled up on the wrong side of the bed. Yes, we can still wipe out humanity if we wanted to. That's still an option. 2,000 bombs. Um, so you're asking me, is it a good thing? I think a world with less nukes. I think a world with no. I think a world with no nuclear weapons is a good thing. I think a world with less nuclear weapons, just held on by the powerful few, doesn't actually change the status quo, and maybe could even be more dangerous depending on who are the ones who have the weapons. So,
Right.
um, I would consider more countries having nuclear weapons, if we couldn't have zero nuclear weapons. If Ukraine had nuclear weapons right now, would Russia be invading it? Would they be invading a nuclear power? Maybe. Maybe. It's not impossible.
It would be a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
I think we agree, right? Because I mean, you I think that if we started dismantling our arsenal like down to 2,000, right? It just kind of feels like virtue signaling, right? Because you said it yourself that we could still, if we decided to, just like push the button and then everything's going to shit either way. I think in a world where there are irrational or possibly irrational actors that have their hands on nuclear arms, right? The only way to ensure, mutually assured destruction, the only way to ensure that people are as safe as they can be is to proliferate, right? I think that's the only thing I think that's the only reasonable, the only rational thing we could do at the moment. And since we agree on that, right? That we'll make this statement, right? That like a world with more nukes is better than a world with fewer nukes, only controlled by the very powerful, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I want to jump in here.
Please.
Sure. I just the only thing I would like to say is that just to bring us back full circle is that I think you can make a similar argument for different types of military weaponry.
Interesting. Okay, I do want to hear that. But first, only facts. Hey, buddy, thanks for being
Of
here. I
course,
haven't
yeah.
talked to you in quite a bit. How are you?
Yeah, good. Well, I've been sick for like the last 2 weeks. It's not COVID, but it's just some infection, sinus, something. I'm all over the place. So, but yeah, I'm getting better. I'll come back with a bang and say I think some of this talk is silly, and not silly in like in a mean way, but in a way that it just reminds me of like defense, Secretary of Defense like Robert McNamara with JFK, like how they would just like hypothesize about nukes and the Bay of Pigs and all that jazz, and nothing came of it. So I think the first important thing is to note that it's quality over quantity. So um, it's how you deliver the nukes, the kind of missiles and the systems. You know, if you don't have a missile that can go intercontinental or whatever, it's pointless to have the nuke. Second of all, the maintenance of nukes and the cost of maintaining them sometimes outweighs the actual benefit of them. I know that sounds kind of like counterintuitive, but just keeping them safe and keeping them well maintained can outdo whatever threat you're ever going to face. And then two more points is every time we get into this talk about nukes ending civilizations and ending us all together and whatnot. There's that movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage,
I do remember
and I
that. I
remember
remember
at
that
the
movie. I was thinking that before.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember at the end of it, it says, Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed X amount of humans, and it was horrible. And not to belittle what happened there. However, it showed that the manufacturing of AK-47s and M16s and da 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 and all these like simple things have killed tens and tens and tens of millions of people in that same time period. So like the real weapon of mass destruction and the real like civilization ender is a $20 Chinese replica AK-47 being smuggled across the Sahara Desert into like Chad or Mali. So but on the last note, I and this may be kind of off topic, but it's something that's bugged me a lot the last couple of days or weeks here on Twitch. It's some of the bigger like Twitch creators like literally foaming at the mouth about these new weapon systems that we are not testing but like giving to Ukraine. So America's been using like the Javelin and these like kamikaze drones. And I don't know, maybe I'm old school, but I remember in 2003 when I lived in an Air Force town and people were literally cheering the shock and awe campaign of Iraq. And we basically gamified invasion and bombing and killing of people. And if you remember, we slowly got into the Obama era where, oh well, look, I'm Obama. I'm gonna pull our troops out and I'm gonna put drones, and these drones are gonna do great and da 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 da
This
da.
is
And
Obama
then you get
impression. Go ahead. Nice.
yeah, yeah. And then like 8 years later, this CGAR report or whatever comes out, and it's like, well, 89% of the dead were not our initial targets. Now we don't know if they're innocent or whatever, but so I'm not gonna say 89% innocents were killed, but let's just say 89% not our target
Unintended.
was
Yeah.
killed. Yeah, or collateral damage. So my point is this is supposedly like manned drones with like day and night reconnaissance, and we're still getting it wrong. And yet there are people here on this platform that are lefties, who I will not name, and there are people in general mass media, which expected. But I'm really more disappointed with people here and on YouTube, where they're foaming at the mouth. Oh, this is amazing. Uh, these drones, look at the drone footage. They cost $6,000. They weigh 5 pounds. They're like toys. They can do this. They can do that. And like it's almost a repeat of 2003 in the sense that we are conditioning ourselves and like gamifying this thing called war. And like now I feel like it just opens up this next generation of Americans to accept this cool like suicide. I mean, I don't know if I'm just permanently a leftist, but like I just have seen from 2003 to 2000 blah blah blah, and here we are now. So whatever.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump on that for a second. I also want to hear what Neon has to say.
Sure.
Is so we had going back to that ban on cluster munitions, right? I'm just looking at the Wikipedia article. It says that and I'd seen the sentence previously. It says the treaty was opposed by a number of countries that produce stockpile of significant quantities of cluster munitions, including the United States, among others. The U.S. has acknowledged humanitarian concerns about the use of cluster munitions, but instead that the proper venue for a discussion of cluster munitions was the forum attached to the conventions of some harm. The U.S. has further stated that the development and introduction of smart cluster munitions were where each submunition contains its own targeting and guidance system, as well as an auto self-destruct mechanism, means that the problematic munitions are being moved away from in any case. So there it is again, right? This reliance on technology. It's like, well, okay, well, we have now smart bombs, right? Another type of smart bomb, and that solves everything. Don't worry, we can still keep manufacturing this profitable product, right? Product of death. We can still keep manufacturing, but now they're smart. And so then they won't kill others, right? So there's an auto self-destruct mechanism. Okay. Each has targeting guidance system. Great. And as you've demonstrated already, only facts that despite them having those quote unquote smart bombs, we still kill so many people, unintended targets, right? Probably civilians, probably innocent people. But even if you don't want to say that, unintended deaths happen all the goddamn time. So I never believe it. Once I hear these smart bombs bullshit, right? This reliance on technology will save the day. It'll make war easier. It'll make it more sanitized. It'll make it more precise. Don't worry, right, about the humanitarian toll. And that's beyond the point of like, well, should we even our targets? Should we actually be bombing them in the first place? That's a separate conversation. Still,
The gamification of it, like this Xboxification of war. Like we're just pressing buttons, you know. You don't have to really see the blood and guts, you know, splash on your face when you take these things people out. But anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just.
that's fine. If you want to jump in, Neon.
No, I think it's I mean, I think there is some, I think there is, you know, maybe like a hair of credence to the to the statement, you know, that smart bombs make conflict more sanitized, right? Because, you know, it's based on the premise that, oh, if these bombs all self-destruct, then they, you know, they won't lie dormant in a war zone for like 20 years, right? And then, you know, like a family of four doesn't walk over one, you know, and then they're just dead for no reason, right? That is the premise, right? But that's also been, you know, like the dialogue for about as long as we've been developing, you know, like instruments of war, right? You know, like we're led to believe that we are at, you know, our pinnacle of technology with our drone strikes and our predator drones and things like that. And then what was it? They killed that aid worker and like 10 children in Kabul. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just back in what was it, 2021, or was it earlier this year?
Yep.
Yeah, back in 2021. So I mean, we're being fed this we're being told these things, right? And I'm sure to I don't even know how to say this. I think if, you know, there is a way to make cluster munitions more humane, I mean, I think there's only I think that's a good thing, right? Not that we should be using them in the first place, not that they're like morally sound to, you know,
My problem is that
bring into conflict,
the
right?
promises are they always fall short. They always fall short.
Yeah.
Every time. So like so okay, even if it's an auto detonation thing, right? Well, you scattered bombs all over the place, right? Um, uh, well, that still equals unattended targets, right there.
Yeah.
Like if you scatter them all, doesn't matter if like um, it makes a difference if you can blow them up in a timed manner, okay? But it doesn't mean that one, it's a bomb and like it's dropped in a war zone, so things can go wrong, right? Like like the whole point, the bomb's supposed to blow up in the first place, right? So there's a failure there immediately. So then you're saying, oh, we have a backup system and that won't fail, right? The bomb has already failed
Right.
once, and now you're saying, oh, we have this backup system and that part, that's a failsafe, that's foolproof. It definitely won't explode, won't not explode at that point. But what if it doesn't? And we're literally in the same position again, like. I maybe a munitions expert could maybe prove me wrong here or something, but I don't see
Right.
how. Like we're relying on a faulty product to of its failsafe to solve that problem, where that failsafe can fail as well. I just
Yeah, I think
Or
the
to add some,
question comes from like the utility, right? Like why do we have so much or I guess why would we consider using, you know, these weapons? Why are we developing them so much when the alternative, you know, like I'm not sure. I would have to
look,
do some Googling before I look into how useful something like cluster munitions are in like a war zone, right? But I can't help but wonder, like, if this development in this field is like really necessary, if there isn't some like, I guess, alternative. I don't know.
I wanted to add this as a former slash academically prepared materials engineer is something I learned in the 5 years I worked for an oil pipeline company is and I only worked for an oil pipeline company because it was the lesser of the evil of not going to work for Lockheed Martin, which I'll
Right.
actually get into here in a second, which is actually ironic. It has to do with Ukraine. But I, the one thing I noticed as an engineer was I grew up thinking we'd be making like amazing things like all the time, right? Like we'd make product X and then like the next product we're gonna make is gonna be like this next revolutionary product, right? But it was always X plus 0.01X. And what I mean by that is we always were releasing like gradual small upgrades of the latest pipeline system. Sort of like the iPhones now, right? It's like iPhone 13, just like the iPhone 12, but with a little this and a little that. And it's like really, and we got to pay this much more. But I apply that same idea to our weapon systems, where it's like the engineer, and I haven't worked, and so I'm just hypothesizing. But it's like, oh look, we've got smart bombs that can do X, Y, or Z, and just don't worry about it. We're in the new era of uh you know military 3.0 technology, and like if you're an actual engineer and you like break down like the actual technicals behind it, you're like, well, wait, uh the difference actually is like this like 2% difference that is like a moot point. Like I don't know, we were making something where like we could promise that our pipeline wouldn't do bad in the sun of the Middle East, and all we did was did a hypothetical product that was used in a different test case scenario, right? So like these weapon manufacturers, just like car manufacturers, right? They'll tell you the car goes 30 miles a gallon. But that's in the best conditions, controlled conditions, and everything's perfect. But war isn't perfect, and the conditions aren't controlled. So, one theater of war might be Ukraine, the other one might be Afghanistan at 20,000 feet in the mountains. They react differently, and that's something that they're not going to get into the details of on the nightly news, right? Secondly, I was gonna do a little weird flex, but I was going to actually before going moving to Oklahoma, I went to Auburn University for my undergrad, and there's a town called Troy, Alabama, and there's a Lockheed Martin plant. And when I went there, I remember the product I would be working on would be the coincidentally the Javelin system, which is now being used in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. Which now I want to lead to the next thing is I wanted to run this theory by you guys, and it is a lot of times these companies will say, "Hey, look, our weapons systems are more smart, more guided. We'll kill less people, it'll kill less collateral damage." Da da da. So this is great, right? And like people will say, "Well, yeah, that means less people are being killed." And I always counter it and say, "Well, maybe it just means we are going to how do I say this? We are going to escalate our killing power." What I mean by that is okay. So the last missile killed 20 innocents and 5 bad guys, and if this new one's supposed to kill like 10 bad guys for every missile, we'll just start using more of those, and we'll kind of work our way back into the same problem again. Does that make any sense? Or
If I could add, so I
go
think
ahead.
what you're trying to say is like
Yeah.
if we're using with like I don't want to call it primitive because none of this technology is primitive, but like a more
Yeah,
primitive
but
form of technology would kill a certain number of people, but if we upgrade
mhm,
it, then it kills exponentially more people, and we keep using it more often, right? Then we just
yeah.
kind of come back to the same problem of, oh, this is equally ineffective but in a different way. Is that what you're
Yeah,
trying to
like
say?
we sort of like give ourselves a moral excuse to then increase our budgets and increase our reliance on these new weapon packages. So remember when drones first came out? Oh, we were doing only 10 drone strikes, testing it out, and then we kind of worked ourselves into a tizzy about how smart they are and amazing, and then it's Trump goes and like escalates it further, and now we're killing even more innocent people. So it's
That's not the
so then
case
it's like,
whatsoever.
oh wait, is that guy again?
It's
Oh wait,
snowed in.
let me
He's
just
Hmm.
back. You
Okay, oh, that is Snowden. Okay, well, let me finish really quickly before we get into the Seagar report and all that
Yeah,
jazz.
I kind of want to.
Uh,
I kind of want to go back a little bit. I have
yeah,
one little
I do
small
want to
go ahead.
thing,
answer
but
that
whenever,
question.
but
I,
whenever you're done.
I do want to answer that question, Neon, too. But so first, only facts finish the point you're
But,
making. I want to tackle
oh,
Neon's
oh,
thing, and then we'll talk to Snowden.
yeah, I'll try to stick around for Snowden with all due respect. But no, and just to end, I was just wanting to say that I feel like we just work ourselves way back into this conundrum of you know uh, anyhow, I just want to end with the fact that CNN showed how Zelensky wants 100 uh, whatever javelins and 100 stingers a day, and I'm like, oh, so I feel like we're back to step one. Now. Anyhow, go ahead, Primes.
Okay.
I
Neon, you were going to you had a question for me, and I wanted to answer that. But if you wanted to talk about something else first, go ahead, Neon.
Well, no, I mean it's just kind of a it it's in the same way that OnlyFacts kind of has is like engineering tertiary to like munitions, right? I was an F-15 technician. I worked on the avionics system for the C&E model. And so I can tell you that I kind of have like a pretty decent understanding, I think, of military technology. Um, Not necessarily the bombs and munitions and things like that, but things like radar, communication, navigation, stuff like that. That's everything that I worked with, and I can tell you that every time that we got a modification for that airframe, it was always, and I have to be kind of vague here, it was always a significant improvement over the old technology. Now I didn't work at a test base or anything. I wasn't on like the cutting edge, right? So all this stuff had been gone through for however many years, in like Nellis Air Force Base and stuff like that. But it's everything that we got, it was always either to minimize things like fratricide, uh, improve our radar package, things like this, and it was always leaps and bounds more effective than the previous version. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with applying that to our munition systems because I frankly I don't have like a full grasp on it. But I can say that that's how the military employs its improvements when it comes to computing things like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, things like that.
You had asked me, and we'll get to Snowden in a second, I promise. You had asked me. You talked about banning nuclear weapons, or at least
Yep.
getting rid of them, right? And then I said that a world with more nukes is better than a world with less nukes. Depending on who has them. And then you've tried to expand that to other conventional weapons. So basically, a world with no cluster bombs would be better than a world with more cluster bombs, which would be better than a world with less cluster bombs. That what your argument was?
I think you can make a similar argument for different types of military equipment. I'm not sure if I would expand that specifically to cluster bombs, but when it comes to things, there is a element of fear when it comes to invading someplace. Like, for example, we'll use somewhere like Saudi Arabia, right? Because I would have to check, but I don't I don't believe that they have. Well, we'll say, oh God, I'm gonna have to look it up, but I'm not sure if Saudi Arabia, I might be getting them confused with Turkey, has outlawed the use of chemical weapons, right? But there is an aspect of fear there that I think may translate to a form of utility that could be argued as a form of like national defense.
Okay. Well, I, I hear what you're saying in terms of fear. I think that a soldier going into a zone, right? like who's the fear supposed to be enacted on? Like a soldier? I mean, I think a soldier is gonna be plenty of free one way or other, because a bullet will kill you, right? Like
Yeah,
a bullet will kill
you're
you just
right.
as dead
Yeah.
as a bomb. So I don't know who we're trying to intimidate. The commanders who aren't going to be on the front lines, uh, the policymakers behind it who decided that we're going to execute this war in the first place. Who is actually going to be intimidated by that? The soldier who's most likely to die is going to be scared no matter what, right? Their lives are on the line, and so I don't see how we can escalate that with like white phosphorus. I mean, it's also terrifying. Yeah, like you could say to yourself, I don't want to die that way, but I also don't want to die from a bullet to the skull. So I don't see. And even there, I don't see the point. Does that make sense, Nia?
It does make sense, but I think that there's like, it comes into like I think you can expand upon it, right? It's not just, oh, like who are we scaring, right? I think it also comes in the aspect of like, do we want to put our people at risk going to war with this country that hasn't outlawed, like chemical weapons, white phosphorus, cluster bombs, things like that, right? Do we want to possibly subject our people to that type of, you know, that type of danger, right? Now, obviously, this only applies in like an offensive war, right? Um, and I think that would be a better way to approach it. Of course, you're right. Like the policymakers don't care, the generals don't care. They're not the people that are going to get shot at or choked to death either way, right?
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. We can expand on this. I want to then. Oh, we got two more people. So we'll go to Snowden, and then after that, a leap prep person. Okay. Hey Snowden. Thanks for
Hey man.
being back. I didn't have. I don't have to call Snowden. Snowden simply appears from the ether when we're talking about these things. So,
I just saw that
Unfortunately,
notification on the server, and I just thought, well, hey, it's an interesting topic. But it does seem to have gotten away from on the core question that's been asked about America making it worse. But to the point Neon mentioned, um, you do need to increase R&D spending and procurement spending for the development of um, munitions that have lower yield, right? The avionics on those munitions to also make them more precise at the aim point for where you want the munition to land, right? That decreases the chance of collateral intrinsically and increases lethality on the targets that you're after, obviously, right? If I had a little smart bomb that had a yield of 3 meters, I could deploy those on numerous targets across the battle space, even in densely urban environments where the Russians are currently at, to strike only their guys and avoid the civilians, right? So increased lethality on the target you're after, decreases on Civ. And it's on the you mentioned chemical weapons and so forth. It's funny you mention that because the Americans and the Ukrainians and of course NATO and the West are concerned about the Russians actually deploying chemical weapons. What type of chemical weapons? It's yet to be seen, but that's the concern. White phosphorus isn't a chemical weapon. What you see mostly in that cloud is the byproduct of the chemical reaction by the phosphorus oxidizing. You're talking about the parts per billion, right? You could walk through a cloud of the smoke screen and be fine on skin, lungs, and so forth. Eyes, there'll be a bit of an irritation. You're going to have that with any smoke, right? It's the flagettes that have the hot reaction going on. You don't want to touch those because it'll melt you, right? It's like, ugh. But the smoke itself, it could lead to incendiary, those flagettes. It could cause fires. They're pretty rare in causing fires, but it seems the American Russians are just deploying them for typical smoke operations, concealment and such. But yeah, NATO is concerned for actual chemical deployment. So
Okay, well that's actually helpful, because I wasn't sure. I asked that question whether using it as a smokescreen, as we in our articles been reading about, would be like like a severe liver tantrum, but that's fair enough. Okay, thank you for that. So Neon, okay, do you want to say something?
No, I said all good. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, Neon, if you want to respond to that, I think some of that was directed toward.
Yeah, no, I think I think we're circling back to what we were talking about earlier, Prime, where yes, the when it comes to improvement on munitions and their targeting aspect, right? Of course, you're looking the premise and the premise that you base the whole thing that you based what you said, Snowden, off of was that it's supposed to increase lethality and minimize civilian casualties, right? But that's what Prime and I were kind of talking about earlier, and I think because you have what was that aid worker that died in Kabul and like his family and 4 children, things like that. Something like 10 civilians died off of a drone strike based on bad intelligence. I think the worry is that even if we do, I mean, it is an arms race, right? Where we improve our technology, we improve our munitions and things like that, right? But we're using these improved armaments, and yet at times we go into war with imperfect information, and it results in more people being killed. So I'm not sure if it's a worthy pursuit. To be honest with you, I'm
Could I
really
have
not sure.
a quick
Yeah,
little
sure. Yeah,
response
go.
to that, and move on to the other person who's joined. The problem is you're concerning about a time sense. The Kabul airstrike. The problem there was the day prior. There was the attack on HKIA. It was a time-sensitive target. You had 60 sources of intelligence coming in. The vehicle, the Toyota Corolla, I think it was, or the truck, came from a known ISIS-K building. That's still confirmed to this day. And even after the airstrike, the following day, it had rockets attacks from that building. And the intelligence was saying there would be a white truck that would be slowly throughout the day heading towards HKIA, picking up things and so forth, and then going to the attack. And its pattern matched that straight on. There was some confirmation bias because of the time-sensitive nature of the target that happened according to the 15.6 and the Inspector General investigation review of the investigation confirmed that. So you can't, for the most part, attribute this time-sensitive dynamic to pre-planned and so forth. Even Dianne Feinstein, when she was chair of the Senate Intel Committee, had confirmed that at the peak of the drone program, CivCas per year outside areas of active hostilities, you're looking at single digits per year. That's how good it got. So you can't very much compare those types of things to a time sensitive and over the horizon. But I'll pass it on to the other person who just joined. That's my quick response.
Only fact you were saying something about the civilian casualties. So maybe if you want to respond to that, I'll gather your facts if you disagree with Snowden. If not, then while we're waiting on that, let's talk.
I think the last time. Oh no, I was gonna say it's ironic because I think last time I got into a little heated thing with him over this actual thing. So I'm not really gonna engage on this actual incident. But we can just keep
Oh
going.
no, I'm talking about
gonna
civilian
kinda-
casualties, specifically civilian casualties, saying single digits. It seems like what you were saying previously, unintended casualties. Right? I guess those are two different things. You said unintended casualties. He said civilian casualties.
It's civilian casualties only in the when it comes to drone strikes, right? I mean, you can expand if you want to expand this conversation to any type of military weaponry, we can, right? But when it comes to drone strikes, I think it's something like only 2,000 actual civilians, unintended targets were killed over the course of what I'm looking at right now, it says from 2004 to 2022. But that's only when it comes to drone strikes, right? So we are,
But
at least relatively. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a good word for it, right? Like, it does
I feel like
seem
that's based on
it,
our counting. But yeah, I know.
yeah. I mean, it does seem to be,
No, that's from
fairly.
NGOs.
It does seem to be.
Advertisement.
It does seem to be fairly effective when it comes to minimizing civilian death, right? But that is kind of. I agree, that the Kabul incident was very specific, and I agree that drones are fairly effective at minimizing civilian death, right? But when it comes to just the topic of trying to minimize civilian death when it comes to the U.S. in war in general, right? We had something like how many tens of thousands of people, of civilians, die in Afghanistan, right? Yeah, like I know that's based off of like 20 years of conflict, right? But that's a much bigger number than single digits, and I think it would be fair to attribute a fair bit of that to the United States technological advancement, right? And most of the time the failure doesn't come from our technology; it comes from our intelligence, right? And
I
that
was
I
just gonna
think you
say
can
that.
apply. That I think you can apply pretty much across the board.
Which can also lead into technology, right? So issues with PID, for example, positive identification. The one airstrike in this wasn't air drone strike in Syria in 2019. There was an F-15, I think, did the airstrike, but there was all other drones by the Americans were in the sky doing their own things for whatever. And a special forces team was calling in airstrikes on ISIS positions. And there was a drone overhead, but this one sadly didn't have the upgrade for HD full motion video. There was another drone in the area, but that was operated by one of the Europeans, I recall. It had HD full motion video. And the Americans weren't aware that that was in the airspace. And it was also looking at this picture. And they had just caught, but sadly the missile had already been launched from the F-15. There was civilians possibly in the area, and they had a better sight picture and HD at that. All the other American had drones, HD full motion. So technology can come back into it even with intel, such as that, for example, right? But again, this is stepping away from the current situation in Ukraine. If America
You
was
are right.
supporting,
You are right.
yeah, if America was supporting, because apparently the Americans are supporting intelligence-wise, if the Americans, for example, had a lot of drones sent over unarmed, full HD resolution and so forth, up in the skies over that, and the Ukrainians were using that intel with their smart little, like the switchblades, the little drone things that are kamikaze, they can even delay 2 seconds or 3 seconds before impact.
So I want to let in the two people who are just out here, and we can stay on this conversation. Hello, Libra. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, VPN dropped out.
Oh
Sorry.
no problem.
Yeah.
Libra, you wanted to do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd really expand on what Neon brought up a bit of time ago. I think the most crucial detail in all this is human error, because if you look at most of the casualties caused by weapons use, it's mostly not due to technology, but ineffective use of technology. So, for example, the reason why I think Javelin missiles are so popular right now is because they are so automated and they minimize human error. So I think that's why people are very hyped about it and why they are possibly safer than a lot of the other alternatives. At least that's my thought.
Well, it's not for an airstrike, right?
Well, yeah.
It's for tanks and stuff.
Yeah, it's like easier to use than other guided missile systems that are like portable, I guess. As I
Okay.
understand.
Well, I mean, it's because it's a land invasion that the Ukrainians don't have to worry about airstrikes on the Russian positions because it's mostly ground force. They can just when the Russians do penetrate that airspace, they can get them out of the sky. But then also for the ground forces, just MLAWs or Javelin to take out the vehicles, right? It's not comparable to airstrikes. If you see a column of vehicles, some civilians have been near them, right?
Oh,
But
no, they're definitely
for
not
ambush is not the
comparable.
case.
Yeah, they're definitely not comparable. I was just
Yeah.
saying that human error.
Here's the thing.
The argument that OnlyFact was making about like people being hyped about javelins earlier. I think it's because I mean Ukraine is severely underpowered compared to Russia, so they like have to make use of the most advanced technologies. I think, at least.
Here's, and I agree. I just there's this like thing in the pit of my stomach where I feel like, and maybe I'm just being conspiracy theorist right now, but that we are using Ukraine as this like exhibition of like, hey, you guys used to say about us that we use these complex systems against people riding donkeys with RPGs, and said we were, kind of overly disproportionately beating these people. Well, look at us now. We are we're kicking the Russians' asses with our best weapons, and here's a great exhibition. How it works, and I'm not saying that's. Well, wait. I'm not saying that this is a conspiracy. I'm just saying that I really hope that if America is in the game to supply the Ukrainians with weapons to actually win, I hope it is to effectively win in the quickest time possible, and not just this like piecemeal, like drip thing. Secondly, and this is probably one of the last things I want to say, and this is not something we can quantify or qualify other than anecdotally. So I'm kind of working against myself here. But in places like Afghanistan, when the Taliban saw us using drones, there's a reason why I don't think we won in Afghanistan, and I do think it's because of drones. And I feel like drones, not just killing innocent people or not, etc., but it's the fact that they viewed Americans using drones as a sign of cowardice. That real men, quote unquote, real men come to battle face to face, door to door, urban style guerrilla warfare. And fighting a war from drones, etc., was enough to galvanize this sense of whatever you want to call it, revenge, nationality, pride, where these people wanted to fight the Americans. I don't know how to quantify that because I don't have a poll that says, well, why are you fighting
I don't
against
think
America?
you can.
But
Yeah, and that's not. So a good demonstration.
it's a
to counter
sentiment
that-
I've heard.
Yes. So if America has the justification morally and legally to intervene and fuck Russia's shit up in Ukraine, just Ukraine, not a full-fledged go for Moscow, but just kick them out to demonstrate their but by this logic that you espouse or that you have a feeling for of here's us putting all of our advanced tech
I'm not
for
saying
the
it's good or
clear
bad,
moral
by the
good,
way.
right? That the Americans have that moral position to do so, right? So I don't see that logic coming forth because the Americans have been extremely reserved to the detriment of Ukraine, I would say, despite the javelins and MLAWs being fantastic.
But I could also
The other
say,
point-
I could say
Hold
they are
up.
being reserved
The-
in the sense of wanting to. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's all good. It's all good. The second point there is with regards to Afghanistan, it being a slight derail though. That was lost because of Trump's Doha agreement. The Afghani the
I know I
Afghan
disagree with
government
you on
and
this,
its
but I'll let you go.
the Afghan government was doing quite well since 2014-15 because of the success in the mid 2000s. Obama's like, okay, well, we're going to start to pull down troops, right? He does that. Then the Taliban make ever so slight gains, right? Karzai requests additional forces to help push back a little bit from the Taliban. Success, right? More efforts continue to work with the Afghan government, continue to see more and more improvements. And then, okay, Trump's like, well, okay, fair enough. I'm going to do the Doha Agreement, which didn't have the Afghan government at the table. That's really dumb. And it made a lot of concessions to the Taliban, which the Americans met those concessions, but day one, the Taliban violated. So then it weakened morale and so forth. The logistics backbone was crippled for the Afghan government because they weren't part of the negotiating table. And then it just was a domino effect from there. And then just everything went tits up. That's why Trump's Doha Agreement and Biden's continuation of it. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing, and I don't want to debate this with you because I know we're going to disagree, and I don't want to, get into this whole thing. But your previous comment about America's this like moral good in supporting Ukraine, I think you presuppose that America is a moral player in a positive sense, and my stance is being that I don't see any moral players, specifically Russia, the most immoral player, but I see it as a spectrum of not moral good, but of, I think, immorality. And I
My
feel
comment
like
doesn't assume that.
America, well, let me just do this one thing. And I don't know if this is an apt or an appropriate analogy, but I see somewhat of what America has done to Ukraine, what America does to the Kurds, kind of giving these false promises and kind of leading them on. And then at the last second saying, oh, well, I mean, literally in Syria, America has to do these like coordinations with Russia before they go on strikes to help the Kurds because so they don't hit each other, right? And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, we can't risk this anymore. We're out. I know that's not the actual reason, but I'm just kind of giving easy
my point there wasn't. My
Right.
contention there, my disagreement there wasn't to say that was assuming what you're saying is to be true, that if America was say was the big bad and
Okay.
not being moral, but they just wanted to show things off, that they do have that moral standing internationally. They do, everyone does, to go in and fuck Russia up in Ukraine, for ulterior motives to show themselves off in their tech, but they would have that moral justification to say this is why. That's what I was saying.
Well, I have two questions.
Okay, fair enough.
So, I mean, the question, I don't know if anybody can realistically say that we're showing anything off, right? Like, we've been using Javelin since the 90s, and the Switchblade has been in service since like 2010 or something like that. So I don't know if we're really showing anything off. I don't think anybody can really say that.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either.
I mean, you could argue, I guess, less effectively that we are aiding them drastically when it comes to intelligence, and our intelligence network. You could argue that we are trying to flex over there that way. My second question is for OnlyFacts. You meant, and this is maybe broadening the topic, but I just want to see where you stand. So you said that you think everybody involved in the Ukrainian conflict is either immoral or amoral. Is that correct?
I think I think a spectrum of immorality. Yes.
Okay. So, do you think that in a consequentialist sense, United States intervention, if it were to protect, the democracy of Ukraine, do you think that that might be a morally good outcome?
I think it would be. And I'm not steeped in philosophical terms, so I maybe ask you dumb questions. But
Sure, that's fine.
I feel like I've been telling friends that Putin just got Saddam'd circa 91, where he got too hot-headed and too dumb for himself to control himself, and does the actual thing that People can debate whether Kuwait was a part of Iraq or not, British mandate, Sykes-Picot agreement, and go back to World War One, et cetera, et cetera. But Saddam made a dumb mistake, et cetera, right? And we can do the same thing with Putin, right? Well, he considers Ukraine as part of Russia, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he invades, he's killing innocent people, he's blown up hospitals, he's doing its X, Y, and Z. He's destabilizing a important part of the world, one of the cruxes, the center crossing points of trade, oil, minerals, aluminum, 40% goes to
Breadbasket.
Boeing. Yeah, and just everything, right? So like, yes, but like I think what I was more hinting at was us putting Ukraine in this weird like no-win situation. So like if Ukraine turns to Russia, they lose, right? If they ally with them, they lose with the West. But if they ally with the West, they lose Russia. There was no ever like you can be friends with both. And I feel like we kind of gave them this hope that uh, we'll be there for you. And I'm not blaming America. I'm just saying there could have been maybe better, more constructive developments leading up to 2022 than what has happened. And I guess hindsight is, as they say, whatever 2020, and we're just doing this with the luxury of history, whatever. And maybe I'm just being too critical, but we've seen this play out in other parts of the world where with the Kurds, uh, etc. And I wanted to answer your first question, your first point you mentioned about the javelin being, kind of technology that's been around for a while. I agree with you. This, a lot of these technologies that I'm saying that we are showing off is, rather more developed. But and I don't know the technical thing about this, but it's that America a lot of times will develop a technology, a weapon, and will use it solely by only Americans will use it for like first 10 years, and then we'll sell like a lesser quality, qualitatively less impressive equipment to other countries. So for example, there's a law where we sell Arab nations, qualitatively inferior defense airplanes, missiles than what Israel gets because we see Israel as a better ally and they qualitatively get the better stuff, the grade A, and whatnot. So what I'm saying by showing off is we are now in the development phase where we have the good stuff and we can now show off the B, the MSRP or the Sam's Club version, right? Like the wholesale version, right? And not just that, but I mentioned earlier when I first got on was this like social conditioning and this like normalization of these types of I'll call them toys, right? Uh, Now we're gonna just keep hearing about how great javelins are, or as Snowden mentioned, the kamikaze missiles, and it's just gonna become a part of our lexicon. Shock and awe, et cetera, and then it just becomes a normal thing again. And that's just one of those things doesn't sit well with me. So I agree with I think both statements are whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish this topic off, I guess.
Mm.
I think that the morality of the situation is very simple, right? If anybody can like realistically claim to give a shit about democracy, then they should be like supporting Ukraine in its conflict against Russia, right? Like, I mean, that's just kind of
I agree.
the beginning and end of it. I agree when you say like that that has been co-opted, by it. I think you could say that it's been co-opted and that people are kind of making war games out of this, like they're just like watching, like roosters in a pit between Ukraine and Russia, right? I agree that that is the case. But I think if you were to pick a moral position, I think the support of Ukraine is the correct one, right? And
No,
so
I agree with.
I'll justify the United States sending them javelins, kamikaze drones, and intelligence until the
Hey,
sun comes up. You know what I
If
mean?
I may,
and
Yeah.
I'll say one more thing and I'll
I would,
shut up. Uh, I agree with you. It's just I'm just I guess I'm looking at things in reverse where I want to have this 35,000 foot view and fly in reverse and see how we got here. So like what you're mentioning an or an intervention action, which is necessary in the here and now, right? But I want to look at things also in the preventative manner. Like, how did we get to this point? Like, how did we get to this point where in 2022 in Europe or whatever, a country like Russia would actually dare think and go through with invading another country, its neighbor? Like, it's like with World War II, World War II
So
games, right? So yeah.
So
the answer that's
hold on. I want to see
sorry.
Libra. Do you want to in here?
Yeah, I'd add a few things maybe. I think it's far too cynical to see this all as an advertising campaign for the US military industrial complex. I think there is actually quite a bit of like good morals maybe behind it, like supporting Ukraine and all. There is definitely an advertising part of it, but I think it's far too cynical to only think that's the main reason.
I agree with you. I
So
I, I
so
don't know if you're addressing me, but yeah, I agree
They
with
would.
what you're saying.
Yeah,
So the
just in
problem
general.
so the problem is you keep mentioning the Kurds. The Americans, under UN authorization, issued a no-fly zone to help the Kurds against Saddam's thuggish acts, and engage the military and the air force to uphold that no-fly zone and so forth.
What about more
Um,
recently, Syria? Go ahead.
like more recent, that then comes into the issues with the Turks, and it gets a bit ugly. But Russia, you ask how do we get here? Back in 08, NATO's like, yeah, you could join us. You need to meet certain criteria, right? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But in response to that, what does Russia do? Join them and we'll invade. And
Yeah.
so like, or join Europe, and it's like Ukraine's like, but don't invade. That's why we want to join NATO,
Here,
right?
but I would rejoin her.
Um,
Well, we have the Monroe
and then other
Doctrine, and I don't want
countries,
to.
and then hold up, and then other countries like
Right.
the Swedes now, the Finnish,
Mhm.
they're considering joining NATO, right? More and more, they're having
Mhm.
parliamentary debates right now because of Russia's illegal invasion, and Russia's threatening them as well. It's like, you're the one who's driving people away from you. You're the problem.
Yeah,
Russia's the problem,
you're
not
right.
no one else, not Ukraine, not America, nothing. It's Russia. Russia's
Well,
sending a
here's the
little green
thing.
man. Hold up, Russia's
Mhm.
sending a little green man in Ukraine, in Georgia, right,
I
doing
mean,
false flag shit to try and justify them going in, the actual main force going in, and then the for this current invasion, because of the anti-war effort, the anti-war propagandists over the past 20 years, and the sentiment in popular media that's resonated with the general population across various countries, and political leadership reflecting that we don't want war. Not Biden, Putin made that gamble. I've made these advances in the past, no real response. America's put Afghanistan under Trump and Biden. All right, they really don't want to go for conflict. I'm gonna go for it.
You're blaming the anti-war movement in America for Putin's action, or at least partly so.
No. I wouldn't say blaming them, but because of that anti-war sentiment that the public has, which is then in turn reflected politicians, and rightfully or wrongly say, right, it doesn't matter. But that's from Putin's perspective. It's like, well, the countries don't want it, the populations, the politicians don't want it. Therefore, it creates that environment where Putin can look at Ukraine and go, huh, I could possibly pull this off. That's all I'm saying there, right? Because it's a gamble.
Okay,
All
I could see that really being
Yeah.
part of the calculation. Like if you have, and I think it's fair. I think it's fair. That the U.S. Has made it very clear, right? The American people has made it clear that they're war weary. That sentiment is strong there, and people still do want like U.S. troops pull back from like blocking every theater. And so seeing that as an outside force and like, okay, well, would they actually intervene with me? If everyone is saying, right, from like there's uh no strong policy push necessarily expand our wars. I think we'll do it any which way, but there's no policy push. Yeah, there's no one campaigning. Like, I'm going to
Yeah,
expand this way. That's
exactly.
not a thing that happens. Now, whether we do that or not is a different matter, like in actuality. But I think that's an interesting.
Snowden, I just want to play devil's advocate really quickly. So, and I don't want anybody thinking I'm defending Putin here, because Putin, it is evident that he has lost the plot here, and it's going off the rails. There's no way anybody can defend what Putin is doing at this point forward. However, you mentioned NATO kind of, attempting, seducing, if I can say this, cock blocking or whatever, Ukraine trying to get into NATO. And it seems like Western nations still don't want Ukraine to join NATO, from what I understand. But it's the point that at first and subsequent flirtations with joining NATO kind of gave Russia this Monroe Doctrine-esque belief to their sovereignty and their projection of power. Now we can all disagree or debate or agree on what rights they have to have that feeling or whatnot. But America, similarly, we have the Monroe Doctrine, we have the Truman policy, the big stick policy, where we don't let anybody from any other part of the world, even Western Europe, to interfere with our Latin American affairs in the Western Hemisphere, and anything that is seen as entangling in those affairs, we will militarily respond or economically respond. Now,
the
Russia
Truman
doesn't have.
Doctrine to be so the Truman Doctrine was more that no one should interfere with the the developing third world, like not even like
The Monroe.
no, yeah, well, no, this is Truman specifically,
Okay, good.
and his policies reflect that. But no, so the NATO didn't flirt with it. They just said, like, here's some criteria, specifically on like corruption, both in military and out of military, right? Ukraine has improved against corruption efforts ever since. Still not pleasing NATO that much, but it made improvements. It's why the Americans allowed military aid to Ukraine in the first place, which of course Trump, withheld because he's a snob, and yeah. So I was going to go with that.
Well, no, just to pin the topic down, the reason that for the most part that Ukraine hasn't been able to join NATO is, as Snowden said, they didn't meet the criteria for corruption. But ever since 2014 Euromaidan, Ukraine has had contested territory in the Donbass, and no country with contested territory can join NATO.
Oh, yeah, that as well. Yeah, that's a big key, one of the key points. The last point is that, as you said, you're gonna devil's advocate for Putin. Problem is that Putin knows NATO's not a threat because of the two reasons how you get NATO involved. The ball's in his court, no matter what. One, Article 5, don't attack a NATO member. Simple, right? Just don't do it. Or two, UN authorization, right? Who is a permanent member of the Security Council who can veto that thing?
They themselves.
Russia. Yeah. So either case you look at, it's like, well, NATO can't be a threat. Like military strength wise, of course, but in the reality, it's a no-go.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I want to kind of disabuse myself of like even defending Putin here. I'm just saying, like, I guess I was playing the role of like military geo strategy, like what would be the interest. Yeah, no, but yeah, I don't want anybody thinking, well, you know how Twitch and things work here. Like, oh, look what he said, and like take things out the wrong way. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Anyway.
We have a new challenger, my man Kobe. I've always loved having around. Thanks for being here, Kobe. I'm sure you have thoughts.
I surrender. Kidding.
Good. I guess my question would be, I think it's always striking to me that like all the or at least most examples of like really egregious American meddling are like before the year 1991. It seems like when there was like another big world power that had like what I mean. Obviously, we can quibble about whether or not it's imperialist, but like I had ideas about influencing other countries and their politics. It seems like without that, America, like Yugoslavia, in NATO intervention to stop like a very violent ethnic conflict is I don't think comparable to anything that either the U.S. or the Soviets did during the Cold War. Saddam Hussein was like a pariah state that many people didn't like, and invasion of Kuwait had a lot more support. And I think that the second invasion in Iraq was very bad, but I think it's a lot more. There's like I guess like a little bit more precedent there. And obviously, we can keep going down examples. I would. My question would be, or I don't know if it's like a really question. I guess my comment would be, there's nothing that if we look just say post fall of the Soviet Union, there's nothing that is within the sphere, sort of local sphere of influence within the. We'll go with the Monroe Doctrine sphere of influence that America has done that's even like 1/100th similar to what Russia, even before they invaded, what they were doing in Donbass. Like, obviously we support, I'm sure we fund opposition parties in countries like Venezuela or whatever, but it's not like we don't have like billionaires that are like or that's why I finished this like my thought here. We don't have like billionaires sponsoring like militias in Venezuela and like flying over to Venezuela and like taking pictures and like shooting missiles and stuff. They have that in Russia. Like, we don't have like that level of that just isn't, we just don't do that anymore. I don't know. I think that this constant comparison that I see on this panel and other panels, so where it's like every time we try to talk about anything with Russia, it's like, well, the Monroe Doctrine. Well, what did they do with Cuba? Well, what about that one time? It's like, okay, not only are these not really comparable, it also is. We can do this forever. We can keep going down the list, right? Ukraine is using Turkish weapons. Turkey is a bad country. They do many bad things. You know what I mean? Russia is allied with many bad countries. They do many bad things. So I don't know.
You're not wrong. Like for Venezuela, since you mentioned it, mostly quote U.S. meddling, if you want to word it like that, for the past 30 years, more so 20, but I want to extend it for another decade. Has mostly been through like the U.S. aid program, right? That overt political humanitarian outreach program, right? That they have. Cat hair in my mouth. Yuck. Thanks, Cat. The what do you call it? Like education outreach programs on democratic norms. How to do balloting correctly, being transparent, being in secret, blah 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 blah. All these things for Venezuela and other countries has been more of that U.S. involvement. It's not meddling because it's not favoring, but it's just civic activities and such. And even at its worst, right, like the Bay of Pigs, right, it doesn't compare to what Russia's done.
I don't think anybody's comparing, though. I'm comparing. I think.
Well, Kobe Kobe was referring in general, right? Some people have like saying, "Well, America, yes," but nothing to the same extent.
I do think when it's brought up, it's not a whataboutism or a comparison of like body count and et cetera, and I'm looking at more. I think it's mentioned, or at least I mention it in a more of a geostrategic and a geo, policy sense for these countries, right? That I can see why Putin would object to some certain things, but I don't agree with his reaction, right? I can, because a hegemon like Russia can see itself after what happened in World War II, et cetera, as being vulnerable on so many fronts, whether it's from Japan, China, and then look at Western Europe, et cetera. But I don't think that's ever to compare, the levels of harm inflicted imperially or.
I was mainly thinking, and I think the thing that you said that made me want to come on here the most was a comment about the Monroe Doctrine. And like when somebody brought up the idea about Russia invading Ukraine and deciding that you brought up, well, America has the Monroe Doctrine, right? Like, obviously, I
And
agree. Anybody, a level 1 geopolitical analysis, obviously, states take actions that have material reasonings, even if not necessarily logical. Obviously, yes, there's reasons they want to have. There's reasons. There's geostrategical reasons they're doing this.
Yeah.
But the more frustrating thing is when we see something like this, the urge to have the attention drawn to the fact the Monroe Doctrine, or to the fact that America is showing off weapons, or this or that and the other.
I guess it's more. Go ahead, sorry. I was gonna say relatable because it's us, but
like more recent past Monroe, but still decades ago. Look at when the Americans intervened in like Guatemala, for example. Specifically in the 80s and 90s and so forth. It was to prevent both the government from its human rights abuses against left-wing terrorist groups, and then it was working with the government to get them to abide by human rights and temperate themselves. But then it was working with the leftists, going like, you guys also need to simmer it down. So there the Americans were playing like both sides, chill the fuck out. Albeit Nicaragua, right? Nicaragua, backed by the KGB, starts to try to overthrow surrounding governments like El Salvador, and then America's like, the fuck are you doing? El Salvador starts crying about it, saying, wait, help us here. America's like, okay, gives them a taste of their own medicine and so forth. Compared to that more, imperialistic sense where Russia, for the past few years now, 20, 30, is encroaching to try and actually annex states, and actually bring it into its own territory. Not just to meddle, but to actually bring it in, back to Soviet days. Yeah, you just can't compare the pair.
I'm going to call this out because this is a whole lot of wrong for Snowden. Like, it's straight up in Guatemala, we supported a genocide. The U.S. government.
That's wrong.
Yeah, that is
Guatemala
not wrong. It's very much proven.
Nope, the declassified record makes it
okay, we're going to start defending the U.S. no matter what.
So, the Americans got the regime to stop its human rights abuses, my boy.
Yeah, but they had a role in the abuses, though.
Maybe I'm just like a zoomer. Maybe I'm like a zoomer, but like, listen, I absolutely think that discussing the Cold War is so fucking boring. Okay, I think the Cold War is cool, and I like Cold War guns and stuff. But like, God, it's so boring. Being like, well, America did it in Guatemala. Okay, we're talking about 2020. We're talking about the Russian Federation. We're talking about America. You know what I mean? Like,
not right. He's the one who brought it up.
But I just on Kobe, I disagree with you there. I definitely do. That like. We can't, especially coming from you, that we can't draw upon history to change how to make decisions about the present, right? Like, we bring these things up in reference to current events. Like, how do these things compare, right? It gives us context as to why we're here. To say that we're talking about Russia, it feels like especially myopic, which I don't expect from you.
No, my disagreement here would be that there was a significant geopolitical shift that happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union that makes trying to compare the leadership and the decision making of the United States government in the Cold War eras, especially in say the 1950s, the height of the Cold War era, to now. It's not incomparable, and I would never say we can't draw comparisons, but I would say the reason I said it's boring is just think that many times we kind of go off in tangents, and there's so many threads that are not relevant that it's like it can be sometimes hard to find those relevant threads.
Okay, I hear you. That makes sense. But what Dan just brought up, he was bringing up what he perceived as a slaughter or a genocide, or sorry, however you place it.
It's just historically inaccurate.
Snowden just like is doing basically a Haas here, a genocide denial bullcrap that the straight up like those like tankies always trying to come up with, and saying no, the U.S. didn't do the genocide. Like, even much of the people who research into genocides say it's a genocide.
No, the Americans the government was involved in human rights abuses, and the Americans got them to cut that shit out, right? So, as noted by several independent investigations by the IOB,
what are they?
etc.
What are they?
Right? President's Intelligence Oversight Board,
Yeah,
Inspectors General, Congress, and
please
so
source it
forth.
because
Right?
at least I could source
Already
my
have.
information. No,
Already
then
have.
Where is it?
VC chat. Right. So when it says, for example, the organization D12, the Archivos, that they're formerly called, and so forth, were generally known to have engaged in reprehensible activities in Guatemala. U.S. policymakers who know of both CIA's liaison with them had unsavory reputations. CIA endeavored to improve
this
by
bullshit.
getting
It's
to
not
abide
from
by
the Office
human
of the
rights.
Historian.
This is by the President's Intelligence Oversight Board. The Office of the Historian for the State Department references this material, my boy.
At least I can understand.
The Office of the Historian for the State Department talks about this report, amongst the others. The fuck you on about? I can link it in a moment. You can settle. Right? IOB further notes US policy objectives in Guatemala from 1984 to present, at the time of the report being issued, included support for transition and for strengthening the civilian democratic government, further human rights and the rule of law, supporting economic growth, combating illegal narcotics trafficking, combating the communist insurgency, and advocating for current peace process between the government and the guerrillas. The CIA successes in Guatemala, in conjunction with other US agencies, particularly in uncovering and working to counter coups by the communist insurgency, and to reduce narcotic flow, were at times dramatic and very much in national interest of both the United States and Guatemala. Amongst others, there's also that declassified DoD IG report talks about the military relationships and so forth, improving that and so forth, right? So this is one big fat cope. Citations inbound.
On to that.
Yeah.
I do eventually want to bring in everyone else, and Neon and Libra, where you guys are all. But Dan, please.
Like historians that specifically study on the presence of genocide say it's a genocide. Like people from different departments, including the Holocaust Museum of Houston, says a genocide. But then just go around and say to efforts like, oh, technically, if they did this little thing, then it's not genocide. It's
no one's denying the human rights abuses. The Americans prevented it.
But you're basically
the Americans stemmed it.
Shut up. Just let me finish. Just that you like.
No, this is a complete.
Let him get it out. Go ahead, Dan, please.
Because you're literally just lessening the causes. Like, oh, it's not that bad. It's like they're
no, it was very fucked
native
up. What
people never exist. Barely many of the former natives that lived in Guatemala exist. Like probably at most from the moment from those who studied that say there's at least 5 of them, and I'll get the link.
So you mean there was that? Are you saying that there was an ethnic cleansing campaign?
Yeah.
But there's only 5, literally 5 left.
Yeah, and I will link that.
Yeah, no. So what the Guatemalans were doing is bad. Yes, no one's denying this. Not just its cleansing and so forth, but also its help was dealing with the communist insurgency. Also, those guys were involved in numerous human rights abuses. It was the Americans who got both sides to eventually settle. It was eventually the Americans who got both sides to settle the fuck down and mediate them. Right, as quoted extensively.
Okay,
right.
So
both military side and intel side.
Dan, I'm not familiar enough to make a case. I don't know, Kobe, if you are more familiar with the conflict. But
I'm not. I do not.
Okay, so do you have proof that the U.S. was involved for retrading people with the Skull of Americas who then committed those genocides or something like that?
I literally linked it from the Holocaust Museum of Houston.
Okay, I'll take a look.
No involvement by the Americans in the massacre. All historians conclude it was the Americans who got the government and the insurgencies eventually to mediate each other, right?
So,
not mediate each other, but to mediate both of them, right? As concluded in all those investigations, all historians cite and reference, right? As I quoted before, and then for the DoD report by its Inspector General.
Yeah,
listen,
what was it?
what are you looking at?
Promoting a stable democratic government to include ending Marxist insurgency, eliminating human rights abuses, responding to the economic and social needs of the Guatemalan people, and reducing drug trade trafficking by the DoD's IG, right? Everyone acknowledges this. When the DoD was dealing with military contacts with the Guatemalan military itself, law of war training, for example, detainee operations and so forth, to actually get them to become more professional. That's continued ever since. Respecting civil government and civilian oversight and so forth. That's what the DoD did. And in fact, it was even prior to this, it was the government's, the Americans' pressure that even the Guatemalans, before this happened, were like not cooperating with the Americans, because the Americans were publicly calling out Guatemala for all of its abuses and so forth, and the Guatemalans really didn't fucking like that. So yeah, it's one big fat curb. Reference is already provided.
Go ahead, Kobe.
Yeah, I was just trying to to bridge the gap, I guess, a little bit. I mean, a lot of the times the criticism I think that people make of both of a lot of states during the Cold War is less so that it was they sent a cable where they're you must kill 1,000 indigenous people today. It was more so we trained up about a bunch of far right guys and taught them how to be military commanders and taught them how to do this kind of shit, and then sent them to their country, and it didn't have really the oversight, and that I think is a lot of the larger criticisms. And again, I don't know shit about Guatemala,
but that does ignore the efforts the DoD had in getting these guys to respect.
Both could be true, though, right?
Yeah, both can be true. And I also don't know what the timeline is. What if the timeline is that all the deaths happened, and then that would then a month later they sent the cable? What if I don't think that kind of going back to my earlier point. This
I
is
see what you're saying.
Bringing up the Cold War is there's so many threads here that could really could totally change this, right? Something I wanted to ask. There was a disagreement in chat. I think it's kind of a reasonable disagreement. I'd like to get people's takes on it here. I think a big kind of quintessential disagreement that many people are going to have that view America as being kind of a similar moral actor on the world stage to Russia is obviously the comparison of the invasion of Iraq, right? And I think, and this is in my mind, maybe perhaps this is just my Western American chauvinism that is blinding my judgment here. But I would view regime change, going into a country, killing the government, killing people in the government, killing the main guy or getting rid of him, and installing a new government. Or we didn't run elections. Obviously, I think there's a lot of dispute about how legitimate those elections were. But I view that as being way different, even if we agree that it's bad, way different on the bad scale than violently invading a neighbor, and specifically invading a neighbor to violently increase the size of your border, which at least in part is what they're doing here within Donbass and Luhansk. They're going to do the same thing with Crimea. They're going to take those guys over, and then they're going to do a referendum and have them be
because
what was the person you compared? Could be, I apologize, I missed it.
Yeah, I did. I'll go back. I'll do it really quickly. I view regime change going into Iraq, or if we went into Libya, or if we say that if we were to go into Syria, that is different. We are just changing the government. Then you hold elections and you peace out. In fact, that's the big criticism of America, is we kind of just held elections and peace the fuck out and didn't do anything else, right? That is way less bad than invading a neighbor and then specifically taking that country over and making it part of you, holding a rigged election that turns that country into part of you. The closest thing America did, I'm not a U.S. history major. The closest thing to this, if I remember, is probably Hawaii. Really, violently invade and coerce part of the government coup, and then
also the Philippines, right?
The Philippines.
My only disagreement is we never made them a state. But yeah, very close.
The resistance was too strong.
Very true.
With regards to Iraq, the Americans once they went in, try to pull out straight away, right? Eventually, it was a battalion left in Baghdad, got surrounded. Then, of course, other things started happening, looting and so forth. The Americans fuck it, let's just stay in, stabilize, UN authorized stability operations and so forth, which kept them in. And worked eventually. It was the long haul, right, that the Americans put in. The infrastructure was already there, for Afghanistan, for example, so it was fairly easy comparatively, but that went off without a hitch for the most part. And yes, several democratic elections in Iraq and Afghanistan, but invading a state to then actually make it part of your land, right? Crimea is run by FSB police, right? Sorry, Joe FSB, one of the two. It's fucked up. It's subjugating them to Russian law, and they're separate though, like ethically and all that. So it's pretty fucked what the Russians have done. And I want to do it again in Ukraine. It's like, no, fuck off. These people have their own culture. They're older than you are in terms of historicity. Leave them alone. If they want to do a defensive pact, let them. That defensive pact can't be a threat to you unless you invade it, or the UN magically somehow tries to propose an authorization of military force against you, which you can veto. The fuck? So, Russia's out of line, clearly.
Just to give my 2 cents, I think comparing like US and Russian foreign policies and their so-called meddling in foreign affairs, I think it's honestly quite moronic to compare the two, because this doesn't usually make headlines, but Russia tries to install puppet governments all the time, like literally every post-Soviet country's election is riddled with Russian puppets.
Oh, you're so not wrong.
And
you're so not wrong.
And I live in a post-Soviet country, and I can honestly, this happens all the time, and there are so-called civil uprisings in many post-Soviet countries that are just Russian special agents who have been paid to create a so-called civil uprising to somehow justify either a war goal or some other type of annexation of a country. And basically this is what happened in like Donbass and Luhansk and in all the contested areas in Ukraine. And Russia has done this many times, and this doesn't make front page news, like almost never. So I think comparing the US to Russia is honestly
not even just in former Soviet states, but across Africa, the Middle East, and so forth, right?
Yeah,
the
everywhere where
Russians
they can.
were doing this, and the Americans were often trying to prevent it. Prevent coups, doing counter coups, and so forth, and preventing them, and just the propaganda and disinformation. That's what the vast majority of what the CIA was doing, was countering. Because US interests were basically just the Cold War for the most part, was just let third worlds have their own, hey, fucking come under a sphere of influence, but if you're neutral, that's better than having you turn to the fucking Soviets, right? And so if the Soviets were eyeing them off, the Americans would be countering those penetrations, countering those coups and so forth. And then the Russians would project, and the disinformation campaign, which was very effective in the Cold War. Operation Infection, anyone? The biological weapons the Americans deployed in Laos and shit, not Laos, everywhere. All fucking Russian disinformation that's been traced and is proven and so forth. And Russian declassified documents. So, proof that. So, the Russians would try it and they would project onto the Americans what they were doing.
I think Russia has its information campaign and its investment into like information warfare has clearly paid off, because there are all these American tankies who literally believe that Russia is better than the US, which is honestly
they deny the
laughable.
gulags. They deny the gulags. There was this one. It's not necessarily KGB disinformation, but it's funny because like the tankies say, "Oh, CI documents show how good the gulags were." Scroll down a few pages, and it talks about the abhorrent conditions, rotten food, and so forth. Actually, had this one Marxist say, "At least it was food." Yes, rotten food. How splendid!
I mean, there are so many pictures of, for example, the huge hunger, famine that swept Ukraine under Soviet times. There are literally pictures of people eating their children.
Katyn massacre.
And people say that Russia is like some people in the US for some reason believe that Russia is somehow a force of good, and clearly the information warfare works. This is like a clear-cut example of that.
Operation Infection is still believed by a lot of people in America, surprisingly, that the Americans invented HIV to target the African American community, blah, 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 blah. Still persists quite a bit to this day, and that was debunked back in the day, right? The Katyn massacre, they had the pinned the blame on the fucking Germans, and it took up until the 90s for them to finally concede and have that declassified record show it was actually Stalin the fucker, stamped his name on the order, right? Numerous things that the Russians did projected onto the West, and it's just it's so fucked up.
I mean,
And now
they're
the
trying to do that
Russians,
now as well.
yeah, the Russians have looked. Putin has looked back at what the KGB did in its biological warfare allegations against the US, like in the Korean conflict, for example, and he's just repeated the same thing. But now with the blender saying the Americans are training birds to spread biological agents across Russia, birds, or when the Russians were saying
Are you even familiar with
that
Project
the
Redwood?
Americans were funding ISIS and helping ISIS, and their evidence from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Russians. Video game footage from Arma 3.
I think it was Arma
And it
2,
worked.
actually.
Russia
Yeah.
has done like a lot of stupid things, especially with
But it
in
worked.
Ukraine in 2016 or 2014. They shot down that civilian plane, and they faked the photo. And
It's bad because they could have passed it off as a mistake, but of course the evidence shows it wasn't. But the real condemning thing is, of course, the intercepted audios and so forth. But the fact that the GRU played an active role in disinformation, active measures to say it was rebels. If it was an order, try and distance yourself from it. Say it was a rogue guy, for example, but own up to it, or that it was an honest mistake if it had been. But to then actually smear everything and blame it on someone else is really fucked up and shows guilt at the highest levels from Putin. But compare it to the Americans. The Americans accidentally shot down the Iran Air Flight 555, I think it was, whatever it was. The Americans apologized for, and the circumstances of how that happened are adequately explained. The USS, I forgot its name, was engaging numerous boats by Iran. It was tracking air assets that were coordinating the boat attacks, and the aircraft was delayed at the airport from taking off, and it was slightly off course, and it was just a complete accident. They account for that, right? So, Russia, what the fuck? Sorry, I'm rambling.
Clearly, at least US can sometimes admit their faults, but I think no one is naive enough to think that US is like completely morally good and justified in doing everything it has done, and think there is not a good side pick, so called. There's just the lesser evil, and
well, in this conflict there is also.
Yeah, in this conflict, definitely, yeah. But
so, are you saying the U.S. should invade? Or
what's your prescription? Snowden.
Me? I would have, from the very outset, when Biden was saying the Russians are going to invade. Of course, I was saying this as it was happening, so it's not really hindsight. But I would have put American troops on the border, saying we're just doing training exercises with the Ukrainians, right? That would have deterred Russia straight off.
Oh,
almost
God,
guarantee it.
God,
because the Americans,
this is so bad.
Sorry,
like a warmonger piece of shit.
You would have put Russia
training.
U.S. on the border of Ukraine's border of Russia. I just want to be clear.
No. So the Americans would be stationed in Ukraine doing training exercises with the Ukrainians, not to invade, but just being there, right?
I see what you're saying.
Russia, in its calculus, would have gone, well, we can't do it because the Americans are involved. If we accidentally hit Americans, game over, right?
But I think
that's what I would have done. But absent that, and now as we currently are,
You can't
I would
do that
support.
because
I
you're
would
not part of NATO.
support.
Yeah, that's right. Like,
Christ,
Because
can
you're
you
an idiot when
stop?
talking about all
Can
of this
you
because
stop?
you just want a job with the U.S.
Can
government.
you
So
stop?
so
Just
so
stop.
give it up. And
Can you
it's
simmer
not
Okay,
down,
lying
okay,
please?
about
okay.
Simmer.
Finish your point, and then I do want to hear from you.
Yeah, yeah. But as it currently is, I would support the Americans going in and kicking the Russians out. But to the point I was just briefly strawmanned, the Americans can go in Ukraine, but before the invasion kicked off, to do military exercises with them. All that would be required is the Ukrainians to invite the Americans over, saying, yeah, we're going to do training exercises. Boom, done, right? The Americans, if they got hit if Putin went forward anyway and it didn't deter him, if Americans got fucking hit, then Ukraine doesn't need to be a member of Article 5. The Americans would fucking go apeshit because their own people got killed because they were there doing training exercises. They don't need Article 5.
Yet they need Article 5.
Why?
Because that's how countries work.
What?
Alliances work. You go around and say, like, oh, just because I
Ukraine
want
is
to
not a member of NATO, correct?
Yes.
So why
Obviously.
does Ukraine need to be a member of NATO for Americans?
Because
If Ukraine, why are you talking? No.
Oh, yeah, no. God.
NATO Article 5 doesn't require membership to do training exercises. Australia, a non-member fucking state, has done training exercises with NATO. Sweden, the Finns, have done training exercises with the fucking NATO guys, and they're not members of NATO. All I'm saying is that, hey, if I'm Biden, I would have gone, hey, Ukraine, how about we're picking up intel that says the Russia's going to invade, that Putin's going to do it? How about you just ask us to have training exercises? Boom, there you go. And if that didn't deter Putin and he went for it anyway, the chances of Americans getting in the way, getting caught up, obviously skyrockets, right? If that happens, America can fuck up Russia without even invoking Article 5, but they can trigger it for themselves because America's part of NATO, right? Never mind fucking Ukraine. Ukraine could sit the fuck out and say, whoop, and let America do it and NATO do it because their troops have already been stationed there. They don't need to be stationed there because of NATO. What?
I think there are quite a few problems with this. First being, it would be very difficult to justify diplomatically without seeming like a show of power, or it would be hard to, especially for I think the US.
What was Russia saying before the invasion? They're doing training exercises.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Couldn't America in this position just say we're doing training exercises?
Yeah, but I think everyone knows that Belarus is just a puppet government of Russia.
But where does Belarus come into this?
Well, they did it
They were doing exercises in Belarus.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Russia. They were saying they were doing military exercises, right? So America in response can go, hey, we think they're going to do an invasion, still sound the alarm, but also go, hey, let's do it. If you're just going to be doing exercises, we'll do exercises too. You know what I mean?
But
that's all that had to be.
The thing is that there's a the so-called alliance with Ukraine was very. It wasn't really an alliance, and it was very, very. Cloudy.
It doesn't have to be a formal alliance. They do have military agreements between the two, but even absent a full-fledged that even articulates like exercises, right? Again, all Zelensky had to say was, "Hey, yeah, let's do it." The Russians, they're going to do exercises, we'll do them too, right? And me as president here, right, would say, "Yeah, dude, it looks like they're going to invade, but we can change that calculus that Putin's going to take. If we have our troops there, right, we're in the way, quite literally. He doesn't want us getting involved. He'll probably back off. If he doesn't, well then he's fucked himself, right? That's all that is. Yeah. Now, the critique would be, well, hey, that's putting American lives. You have intel that they're going to invade. The critique would be, well, you're going to put Americans there anyway as possible collateral should. Now, of course, the response is to that critique is, well, this isn't to sacrifice them, it's that to change that calculus. But if it doesn't change the calculus Putin takes, then we're involved because he's attacked our guys.
But
Yeah, and after doing a bit of research, I'm happily admit, yeah, I was wrong about the article section about that. But also to mention that Ukraine, at least U.S., was also doing exercises until February. So obviously the U.S. didn't felt they had a reason to leave, because obviously to them they were for sure know that Russia's going to invade, and they
The
eventually did.
administration said it was because of those signs that Russia was going to
Yeah,
invade.
but what's really the underlying reason, right? You go around and they
Because they
believe
don't
whatever
want their
they
troops
say.
to get
Oh no,
caught
no,
up.
let Dan.
You just believe whatever they say. There's always underlying reasons than to just like a simple press notice. That at least to
Sure,
say
but
for
that's
you,
what we have, right? We
there's
have the
way
Americans
more
are doing
to that.
exercises. Americans
We
were
have way more
present. The Americans
to
get
that.
sign of a possible invasion, and as a safety precaution, they move their troops out so that they don't get caught up. Again, the question posed to me by Prime was, well, what would you have done, right? In essence, and I said I would have kept them there, right, or even increased to further change that calculus that Putin did.
Yeah, this is just straight up like armchair military.
Quite literally.
Yes,
That's what I was asked.
Yeah. Okay. Then, yeah, your answer is dumb and very dangerous to get us into wars.
I think the biggest
Yeah,
problem.
I will fight that.
I think the
Since the
biggest
latest
problem
video
with
was
this
wrong.
approach would be that it
I agreed
wouldn't
with
be.
the approach that Biden took him out, because entirely when you know that they're going to exactly do it and doesn't care if American troops are there, then I'm going to just simply say this is not worth it, and we're not going to go and deal with this conflict. But at least do everything we can in an economic way through economic warfare and through alliances such as NATO and the UN.
Leaper, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say that Putin was banking on the fact that the West would be too scared to intervene. So even if they did strike Americans, I don't think they would have been afraid of America actually being involved. Because they were their like campaign from the start was basically that we know the West won't unite or do anything, and we can just take Ukraine.
That is the real United
calculus.
States, not Snowden's United States, though, right?
No,
I think
no,
we're kind of getting lost in the sauce. You know what I mean?
Well, no, because so with what he just said, yeah, I've already articulated this. Yes, Putin made that calculus that the West, again, I've already said this previous, where Putin makes a calculus of it, the West broadly, as Prime said, war weary. He uses words, so I was articulating that, and leadership has reflected that, right, of various Western countries, America, blah 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 blah. So that's what he took into consideration. But as I said, perfectly fine to take that into account. But then I'm saying, like, if I was president, that having that calculus would have been shifted by keeping presence there of Americans, or even increasing that presence for training exercise purposes, because the Russian, instead of pulling those troops out, like what did happen in reality, you keep them there or you increase it, because then Putin's thinking, well, if I'm going to actually pull this off, the Americans are in the way. If I even accidentally hit them, or I did go for it deliberately, the America's involved, right? I don't want that. So I think that would just change the calculus. Biden seems to have gone the opposite route. We've got a few people there, we're going to take them out because we're seeing signs, and that further made it more inviting, if you will. Right?
Yeah, the amount of risk taking you're making makes me very concerned if you ever showed up to a casino.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree that it would change the calculus. But what you're talking about is like the most thinly veiled accelerationist move that like the United States could possibly take, right? Because then
how's it accelerationist?
Because so you say that it's training exercises, right? So if you want to look at it from like a long-term, right, like a long-term consequence, right? We're Putin right now, right? Long-term consequences. United States is doing exercises with Ukraine. what will this turn into, right? Will it turn into a more formal military alliance? Will it turn into Ukrainian membership in NATO? Will it turn to nukes on the border with Russia? Will it turn it whatever, right? And so
That's
I
a good
think,
point.
I think you could. I think if you're looking at it with a long-term perspective, I truly believe that like having as much as I said it earlier on the panel, but I do believe that if you give a shit about democracy at all, you should be supporting Ukraine and you should be advocating for your country to support Ukraine. But I don't believe that the presence of the United States military in Ukraine would be good for anyone.
So,
Yeah.
so that's a good criticism, because that is more that long term thinking. I was more the short midterm of you're seeing indications in signals intelligence human that there's going to be an invasion that's being planned in the recent coming months. That move I articulated would be to disrupt that. But in response to that criticism, you could say, I mentioned it before that I would have also, as what Biden did, is say, hey, the Russians are going to go for that invasion. So in response to that, so it's more of that
It's wrong because he actually did think
we're
they would invade,
having
and he exactly
we're
did that.
having as I just said, Biden did this still. I'm saying that I would work with that further, right? So in this case, I'm saying the Russians are going to invade, but we'll also do those training exercises to shift that calculus, as I said, mid-short term. And in the long term, respond back with saying that, well, this was purely because we had that indication, as we were saying back then, that the Russians were going to invade at this time. And then further diplomatic efforts for that long-term game, because that is a valid criticism you mentioned, right? So you could still play that out.
I mean, I see what you're talking about, but I think if you want to look maybe even midterm, right? Like if the United States is doing exercises with Ukraine, one of the only things that could lead to Ukrainian membership of NATO, which, you know, the entire country has had the referendum and they decided they want, would be to either acquiesce the Donbass and Crimea, or to retake it, right? So that they no longer have a contested border with Russia. Putin doesn't want either of these things, right? And that is again another consequence of that could be, I should say, another consequence of the United States' presence in Ukraine, right?
If the Americans, because the Americans were again already present, doing trend advisor system missions,
yeah, but you know what I mean.
Aid. So this would what I just proposed is a natural and more immediate continuation of that. And yes, you could still, as I said before, you could still play it out diplomatically for that long-term risk calculus of Putin's, that he wouldn't do it 2 years from now, right? For example, or several months out. You just deterred the intermediate, intervention. But you could say that is going real conjecture. You could just say, well, with Ukraine, hey, okay, Russia is shitting the bed about joining NATO because they're threatening to invade you, and that's why you want to join NATO. Just make an alliance with us, right? We'll if you get attacked, we automatically jump in, right? So it's an Article 5, but between America and Ukraine, right? As a get around. Of course, that's going real into conjecture proper, but
yeah,
endlessly this could go into various diplomatic routes.
That's, I mean, not to get too deep into the conjecture. I mean, you're right. That's all this is. But I think if you're gonna look at if you want to look at outcomes, right? I really do think that the best thing that the United States could have done when presented with the situation after having recently just having taken a massive PR hit with their pulling out of Afghanistan. I really think that in that same, the United States people are war weary. We don't want to get locked down with another, 10, 20-year conflict. I really think that maybe it's the best thing, maybe it's the only thing that the country could have done, is just to support Ukraine the way that they're supporting them now, right? I mean, it's unfortunate that they've basically been barred from NATO membership because, ever since Euromaidan. But I think what you'd suggest, like this United States military presence in Ukraine doing exercises with the Ukrainian military, I mean, it's as thinly veiled as they come, right? It's to prevent a Russian invasion, which is, I think, would give more credence.
It's Russians at their own game.
Yeah. I think doing something like that would give a lot more credence to the opposite side's arguments of things like NATO aggression, things like NATO expansionism, right? I think,
This couldn't feed into that because this wouldn't be NATO. This would just be America.
Right, but America is a part of NATO as well,
Yeah,
right?
but it's not a NATO activity.
And Ukraine is also looking to join NATO, right?
Yeah, but countries can do things on their own without doing NATO activities.
But if we're looking at it in the broader context, I think you could give credence to somebody making that type of argument.
Well, then yes, for the general populace, I would say more of the smooth-brained inclined folk, but
we agree there.
To that, but going to the actual audience that matters, Putin in his inner circle, well, he knows that this whole characterization of NATO expansion is horseshit, because even that NATO, he knows, and his circle knows, and his military knows, decision leaders. The only way NATO is a threat is if you either attack it or you authorize it. And again, the ball is in his court, or whoever becomes next after him, right? So I would say that to the people who matter, that argument still doesn't hold. For the general populace, the pundits, the smooth-brained, yes, sure, that argument does hold. I would grant that. But then, I wanted to touch on something, but I forgot. No, actually, it did. Getting back to the broader question of the hangout,
sure,
or the stream, is America making it worse? I want to ask Prime, what I'm looking for? What characterized that question for you, in terms of how they're making it worse? Right? Is it something you saw, or that people are suggesting that America is making it worse? Or?
Yeah. So, the title. So I guess the origin of that is that the U.S. is using munitions that are dangerous, that should be banned, like cluster bombs, and then Russia uses cluster. Denounce them. How could you use cluster bombs? I basically the source of the question was: could the U.S. be a proper advocate against Russian aggression, using weapons that should be banned if the U.S. is using it itself? That's where. So,
yeah, to that, that's a good point. It is the Americans aren't providing clusters to the Ukrainians. It's just other anti-tank stuff for the most part, and suicide drones. But the point of clusters in of themselves, they're not inherently a war crime, nor should they be. It's how they're used. The problem with, you can use them against a whole convoy, a whole troop movement across open space, for example, or even an urban environment where the civilians are no longer present, and it's fine to use clusters because they're beautiful, right? Apart from the Russian ones, because they're all duds. But then how the Russians are deploying them, even if there weren't a lot of duds, they are deploying them in urban environments with civilians present, and no military targets present, which indicates that the Russians aren't doing their due diligence under international law, which is required to deploy those or other things. So just indiscriminate clusters, thermobarics, even just proper conventional, right? That's the problem America's having, and everyone else is having with them, because again, clusters aren't inherently an issue.
Well, I mean, their fallout is the problem. No weapon is inherently an issue, but the fallout from them. Landmines aren't inherently an issue, but the problem is that they remain unexploded until some innocent person walks past them later on. Clusters,
Yeah.
be a problem for unexploded munitions that explode at some other very inconvenient time.
Yeah, that's not an issue of the deployment. That's just if it is unexploded, and because of the Russians' attack, it does seem a lot of their clusters aren't detonating. Even their other just typical munitions aren't detonating. Thank God, because a lot of civilians are nearby. But for the Americans, for example, they've spent years making sure their UXO, that they don't have as many UXOs for their very unexploded ordnance, to mitigate that concern, because it is a concern. This is specifically about the deployment of them. If you deploy them in an urban area or any area that's got civilians, no military targets,
No, I hear
inherently
you.
war crime.
I hear you. Like you're saying that it's not recognized as one. I'm saying that should that actually be the case, should the U.S. not take? I mean, other countries have already banned these things, right? Like most other countries have banned these munitions. We have not, because of what you and an excuse is what you just said. Like, oh well, we've improved our cluster bombs and we have auto self-destructing ordinances, right? But I think that it's easy to say that. Well, okay, we're gonna have these bombs that are going to take care of themselves. But one, you're talking about a bomb that has already failed, right? So it's a bomb that's failed, and then you're relying on a failsafe on a bomb that's already failed to ensure that it explodes later on, I guess in a timely manner. That's not something I would trust. It seems like the to accomplish the goals that you were talking about, like specifically like a convoy, right? There are other ways that we can do that don't involve these cluster bombs. Why not take a stance and say, like, these things, they're a danger to a population afterwards is great enough that we won't use them. We have many other weapons to accomplish these goals. Why use these cluster bombs? Other than that, people are making money off of them.
I think that is a very fair criticism, though I would say the thing about fail-safes is, I mean, the chance of like 2 fail-safes not working, or even 1 fail-safe not working, is very, very low. And though these bombs are clearly being dropped quite a lot, then that does mean there will be cases where the worst things happen. But I think there's definitely going to be like a post-war cleanup of all kinds of weapons and unexploded ordnance and similar things. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the US being a part of supporting Ukraine is definitely a net good.
We're not questioning that part, but like specifically on this note, right? In terms of what are we using there, what are we willing to use there? You're saying that the 2 fail-safes failing, but they can, right? Like one bomb. Excuse me. Let me try to do it this way. One bomb that we drop, one ordinance, can fail on its own, right? Like, just drop a bomb and that can not explode. But the chances of more, you drop 1 cluster bomb, that chance increases. You can have fail-safes that try to mitigate that, but there's a higher percentage of unexploded bombs. There's going to be, right? One way or the other.
So not intrinsically. So there used to be an issue specifically for Western countries, like Vietnam and so forth. But they've really made that a focus to address that issue. And there's a guidance for the DoD, for the Americans, that UXOs can't exceed a certain percentile.
1%.
It's even less than that. It's like
Well,
forgot
yeah.
the exact
So
feature, but point being, yeah. So they
I
have
know what
to,
you're talking about. Is what I mean.
yeah. So they have to implement the Americans have got good clusters, but again, the inherent with the Russians and other countries, but mostly Russia, is theirs are failing a lot, and as well as all the other types of munitions. And again, it's not inherently the issue of UXOs; it's their deployment of them amongst all the other fires, typical artillery rounds, just the typical howitzer type stuff, just indiscriminate bombings and so forth. That's thermobarics, not intrinsically a war crime, fucked up how they eviscerate the body, but it's how you use them. And the Russians are just leveling anything and everything, what they did in Syria, at a larger scale, back in a sec.
I think that I think that if we're thinking that these cluster bombs are going to explode like post-war and kill civilians or maim civilians, I think the US has probably thought of that because it would be a PR nightmare for US and NATO, and I don't think it. I think they've thought of that because it truly would be a PR nightmare for them.
Well, so I would like to get in, and it's so the problem with this is twofold, right? For cluster munitions, it's their wide area effect, and it's their ability to leave behind unexploded ordnance, right? Now the problem with just saying that cluster munitions are bad because Russians are using it over densely populated areas, right? It's just kind of, I mean, it's part of the problem, but it's not the whole problem, right? Because you can leave behind however much unexploded ordnance, right, for however many years, and that still poses a problem to regular civilians, right? And so the other issue is that the United States can't even hold itself to its own standard. They
Wait, what?
And so the most recent data I can find on this, right, was that the United States had planned to bring their cluster bomb rate of failure below 1%. Now, the only thing I found is as recent as 2017, maybe 2018, and they weren't able to bring it below 1%. So when we approach this, like 1% rate of failure, right? So one M270 missile contains something like 7,000 bomblets. I don't want to do like quick math here because I'll just embarrass myself. But like 1% of 7,000 is not like a what's the word? It is still a relevant number, especially if you consider its use over a widespread area and the capability for these unexploded munitions to just sit there, right, for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, right?
It's only fine if we find all of them right afterwards. If there is a coordinated plan to recover them, to make sure every single one of them is gone. Thank you for the 5 months resub. It's Big Red. Awfully kind. If you're Prime Gaming, hey, if you got a Prime Gaming, use your Prime Gaming. Help out the channel. 1 free month you get with your Prime Gaming. It does help out the channel a whole bunch. So if you're enjoying this content, do that. Also hit the follow button. So like, you could say the same thing with landmines. Landmines obviously a bigger problem, bigger issue. I acknowledge that, but the idea that you that we can have this organized and maintained and focused cleanup after a conflict, I think misunderstands like how conflicts work. Right? Like, you're dropping these bombs. You cannot ever assume that you will ever see them again. If there's anything unexploded, you can't assume that you will have the chance to go back later on. That you will, that the country might allow you to, right? That you can transmit that if you even the best actor saying like I'll transmit this information later on. You should look in these areas, right? We dropped some cluster bombs here. We're relatively sure they're all gone. They've all exploded, but there's what's it a 0.5% chance that a few of them are
So
still there. So it seemed like a recipe for disaster and an unnecessary one.
So the reference to the 1% rate, it wasn't that the DoD's munitions weren't exceeding that. It was that there was a policy change for extreme circumstances that could deploy munitions that didn't yet have the rating for under 1%. They still have, and their inventory one that can exceed that. That's what that policy concerned. There's a good study by the Congressional Research Service on this policy, especially for 2020, because it's just updated because of Russia. So I'll link that.
Okay. I think I think we got it, and yeah, we'll continue this on in the future. Guys, if you've been enjoying this content, fine as to follow the channel, right? Support the channel. We'll be back on we'll be back tomorrow. We're gonna be playing some fun games, I think. Hopefully we'll be playing Cuphead with our supporters, our members on YouTube. So check us out. On Saturday we'll be back. We'll have a small council. It'll be great. And then of course Sunday, the plan is to have the next debate tournament thing where prize pool and all that. So yeah, check out the channel. We are always doing more. We're always writing more content. So support this channel. So, sign up. Hit up our social media @Xmatrix or our social media. Check us out: Twitter, Discord, YouTube, where we'll be tomorrow. So if you're missing our content, it's on YouTube. You just haven't seen it yet. So come by, check out, support the channel. I am going to say guys all.